All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Police Reform Work Group. Our mission is to provide our County Executive, Angela Alsobrooks, substantive recommendations that will establish fair practices across the board and restore public trust in law enforcement. These recommendations are due October 30th, 2020. County Executive Alsobrooks has charged us with studying and reviewing police department policies covering the full spectrum of their operation. Pursuant to that charge, today the agenda consists of presentations from the Prince George's County Police Department, including overviews of their policies on hiring, training, disciplinary proceedings, and other matters. We thank the police department for their presentations. We appreciate the time and effort this took, and we're very, very much interested in hearing their policies and any opinions they care to express. So welcome, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge and Co-Chair. Appreciate those opening remarks. On behalf of the work group, we would like to welcome the Prince George's County Police Department to our meeting today, where they will be providing an in-depth analysis and presentation on the police department. I want to introduce our interim chief, Hector Velez. Chief Velez, all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Your Honor, Delegate Washington. Can everybody hear that? All right, we're good. And fellow task force members, I want to thank all of you for the opportunity to be able to sit down and go over the Prince George's County Police Department structure and other issues that you will be reviewing. Real quick, I'm just going to go down the list to kind of give you an overview of what is going to take place with this briefing. I will provide an overview of the police department. Deputy Chief Harvin will review the hiring process. Major Bill Alexander will do the overview of training that the officers receive. Major James McCreary will review the internal affairs investigations. Major Ewan will go over the DOJ reports. Mr. Alan Lee will update on body cameras and crime statistical data over the last 5 years. And unfortunately, I've been called to a 5 o'clock meeting by Major Riddick, a Zoom meeting. So Deputy Chief Nichols will be closing out with the presentation. With that said, I know we're going to be taking questions after each section. If we get to any questions that are not answered, we're more than willing to, if you want to send them to us, we'll have a response back within 24 hours. So if we may, I'd like to go to the slideshow presentation. Do you have any questions so far?
I hope not. All yours.
Okay. Okay, so this is the, will you be controlling the slides? Okay. All right, so what we're going to start off with is the organization chart for the police department. And this is the org chart for the Office of the Chief. And as you can see, it has the Assistant Chief of Police off to the left, which oversees internal affairs and fiscal management. And his Chief of Staff, Assistant Chief of Staff, and the Office of the Chief. I oversee the Office of Law, Media Relations Division, Information and Technology Division, and I also consult with the Inspector General. And then beneath that are the subunits for each unit that I just mentioned. Next slide. Okay, the next is Bureau of Patrol. And as you'll see on the left, there's an operations commander and an assistant operations commander, and what we call an ODO, on-duty officer. Directly beneath the bureau chief, you have patrol districts 1 through 8. Excuse me for the minor technical difficulties. And then beneath that on the left, you have the shift commander and the patrol squads. And those are the officers that run calls for service every day. And to the right, you have the enforcement commander, which consists of the community-oriented policing squads, special assignment teams, and for District 3, the Juvenile Transition Center. Next is the Bureau of Investigation. Again, each deputy chief has an operation commander, an assistant operations commander. The exception to that is the Bureau of Patrol. He has an additional person because that is the largest bureau within the police department. The components that fall within the Bureau of Investigation is the Regional Investigation Division, North, Central, and South. And those are the investigators that handle your persons crimes, your property crimes, your pawn unit, electronic investigation squad, fugitive squad, your financial crimes unit, and the arson task force. Moving from left to right, you then have the Special Investigations Division, and those units consist of the gang unit. As you can see, it says gang section, and then it lists the gang units underneath. And then to the right is the auto crime section. Beneath that is a WAVE team, which is a Washington area vehicle enforcement team, and they work with other agencies in the National Capital Region, and the tow coordination unit. To the right of that is the Criminal Investigation Division, which consists of homicide, robbery, and gun intel. And then to the right of that is the Special Crime Division, which is Domestic Violence Unit and Special Crimes Unit. And lastly, we have the Intelligence Division, which is our street narcotics. I'm sorry, we have Intelligence Division, then you go move over and it's the Narcotics Enforcement Division, where you have street narcotics, major narcotics, and vice, intel, and JAG. Can you hear me? Okay, next slide. Next is Bureau of Administration, Homeland Security. And within this bureau, you have the Risk Management Unit, Background Investigation Unit, and the Recruiting Unit, and those fall under the Operations Commander. And then moving further down, you have Police Personnel Division, Training and Education Division, and then our Homeland Security Division. And that's broken into 2 sections, which is the Intelligence Unit and the Vice and Sex Trafficking Investigations Unit. Next slide, please. And lastly, we have the Bureau of Forensic Science and Intelligence, and those are our labs. On the left, you have the Forensic Services Science Division, which is DNA section, Firearms Examination Unit, the Regional Automated Fingerprint Section, and the Drug Lab. To the right of that, you have Records and Property. To the right of that, you have a Criminal Intelligence Division and a Gun Offender Registry Unit. And then you have Crime Scene Investigation Division. And those are the guys that respond out to homicides or major crime scenes. Next. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go over the demographics of the police department. And so if you look on the right-hand side, so what we have is the civilian total and then the sworn total. And then on the further side is the grand total with the number of 1,864 listed at the bottom. So for American Indian, Alaska Native, we have 3 officers, 2 of which are female, 1 of male. Asian, 67 officers, 8 being female, 59 being male. Black officers, we have 852, 284 are female, 568 are male. Hispanic, we have 174 Hispanic officers, 27 which are female, 147 which are male. Native Hawaiian Pacific Island, we have 2 which are both male. And white officers, we have 765, which are 132 white and 633, 132 female, 633 male. And then we have 1 that's identified as other. On the next slide, we've broken it down by rank, race, and gender. So if you look in the far left corner, you have the interim chief of police. I am Hispanic male, so I'm listed there.
Hey, Chief.
Yes.
You mind speaking up for us? I think I'm getting some notes from folks that it's hard to hear a little bit.
Okay.
You can speak up a bit so folks can hear you. That'd be great.
Sure. Is that better?
A little louder, but it is better though.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. So to the right of the interim chief of police, you have the deputy chief. 2 of the deputy chiefs are African-American males. And then you have 2 deputy chiefs that are white, 1 male and 1 female, for a total of 4. For police majors, we have 1 Asian major. We have, who is a male. We have 9 African-American majors, 3 of which are females. The other 6 are male. We have 2 Hispanic majors, both of which are male. And then we have 13 white majors, 2 of which are female, 11 of which are male. Moving down to police captain, we're showing a total of 6 African-American captains and a total of 25 white captains. And I want to pause there for a second because that is a big difference between those 2 numbers to explain some of the reasons why that may be the case. So when Chief Stawinski was in office as the chief, he promoted a total of 28 minority officers and 18 of them were white. So 6 were deputy chiefs and 18 were majors, and there were 3 civilian directors. So that's 61% of minority appointments and 39% of white appointments. Also with that, we had, I believe it was a total of 7 African-American commanders that retired during that time frame. And so we had a large promotion out of the captain's rank. The 25 white captains, we have a number of captains that have been on for a considerable amount of time in the captain's positions. So that is why you see a big number difference there. Concerning lieutenants, we have 6 Asian, 25 African-American, 1 of which is a female, 5 are male. We have 25 African-American lieutenants, 7 of which are female, 18 of which are male. 5 Hispanic lieutenants, 1 of which is a female, 4 male. And then we move down to white. We have 56 white police lieutenants, 3 of which are female, and 53 of which are male. And again, we have I think it's a difference of 20 there. And with regards to the lieutenant's position, it is a testable promotion. It's competitive. So there are a number of factors that could come into play. So when you add up the minority officers, it comes up to 36 minority lieutenants, 56 white lieutenants. And there are a number of reasons why that number could be so different. And some of it has to do with officers that decide not to promote. Some of that has to do with officers that retire, and then the competitive process itself. But as you're aware, we are taking a much deeper look into the promotional cycle, promotional process within the police department to see if there's something that we are not quite seeing here. Concerning the, let me go back because I skipped ahead. Police sergeant, 1 American Indian Alaskan Native, which is female. We have 3 Asian police sergeants, 3 of which, they're all 3 are male. We have 84 African American sergeants, 15 of which are female, 69 male. 11 Hispanic sergeants, 1 of which is a female, the other 10 are males. And then we have 104 white sergeants, 11 female and 93 male. And when we look at the total breakdown for that, bear with me one second, it comes out to a total of 98 minority sergeants and 104 white sergeants. So the next slide breaks that down into statistics. And for the American Indian officers, they represent 0.13% of the agency. Asian officers represent 3.71% of the agency. African American officers represent 42.98% of the agency. And Hispanic officers represent 10.53% of the agency. Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, those officers represent 0.13%, and the other classification represents a 0.07%, for a total of 57.55% of minority officers. When looking at African American officers and white officers, there's 42.98% African American officers and 42.46% white officers. And that's that slide briefly. Next. We're going to go over the executive command staff by rank, race, and gender. As I stated earlier, we have 2 African American deputy chiefs, both of which are male, 2 white deputy chiefs, 1 is a female, the other's a male, and then myself as the Hispanic interim chief of police. Police majors, you have 1 Asian major, 9 African American majors, 2 Hispanic majors, and 13 white majors. And then moving over to police captain, as I stated before, the numbers are 6 and 25. Moving on to lieutenant. And this is actually just a repeat of what I had stated earlier. We have a total of 36 minority lieutenants and 56 white lieutenants, for a difference of 20. And then with the sergeants, we have 98 minority sergeants and 104 white sergeants. So that's a rough breakdown of the demographics of the police department. And we'll move on to the next section. But first, I'll take any questions that you may have. Okay.
Yes. Are there any questions? I don't see any on the chat here. Just yet. Any questions, anyone? If you want to raise your hand.
Doug Washington.
Mr. Robinson.
I do have a question. Chief, I don't know if I understood what you said. You said officers decide not to promote?
Yes, there are some officers that decide not to promote because they like what they're doing. And I have quite a number of friends that refused to promote because they knew that if they promoted, they would, like, let's say if I had a friend that was a sergeant, K-9 unit. He knows that if he promotes, he takes the test to lieutenant, he's more than likely going to have to leave the K-9 unit. So what he'll do is opt to stay in that position because that's the job he likes to do.
So he tested to be promoted, but he decided not. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is that a lot of lieutenants and sergeants don't register to take the test for those groups.
Okay.
And when you're looking at lieutenant and captain, there are a lot of lieutenants on the police department that opt not to take the captain's exam for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's often said that the lieutenant's position on the police department is the next best thing to sliced bread. And the lieutenant rank is the point where you stop earning overtime. So once you move into the captain's rank, you're no longer earning overtime. You're no longer represented by the FOP. So what a lot of officers will do is they will work up until the 16th, 18th year, and then they'll decide to test for the next rank. Hoping to get promoted, they'll do their 2 years, they'll reach their 2-year high, and they'll retire at that next rank for retirement purposes. One of the issues that has come up in the past, and I know Mr. McGaw had discussed this, and I believe Mr. Stawinski also discussed this, and that is making the captain's position an appointed position. And what that does is it gives the executive command staff a little bit more control as to who gets promoted. Up until the rank of captain, it's a testing position, and it largely depends on how much effort the person puts into the process. But unfortunately, in the past, that idea received a lot of pushback from the FOP. So I just thought I'd throw that in there to give a little bit more context as to the issues that we deal with promotions.
Appreciate it.
I have a question, please.
Sure.
Sonia.
Yes.
Hello, everybody. Chief, thank you for the presentation. So I just wanted to be clear when you say that officers are choosing not to promote, is the inference there that is one of the reasons why there's a disparity between the number of, let's say, Black officers we have at higher ranks and other officers?
Well, let me clarify. I'm not saying that officers are opting not to rank. I'm saying not to test. I'm saying some officers decide not to. That's just one of the reasons why, we might see. I'm just providing reasons as to why we may see these numbers. As I stated, we are currently doing a deep look at our numbers to get a better understanding as to how many that could be. One of the things I'm working with the American University is conducting a survey in the police department, and these are one of the things that we're going to be looking at. Why do people test? Why don't people test? And things like that. So I can't provide you an exact number as to how many officers decide not to take a promotional exam, but there are a number out there that do. They like what they're doing, and they don't want to leave their current position.
Thank you.
We're going to take Councilmember Streeter, I would just ask, just moving forward, if anyone has any questions, for you to write their name in the chat box, or raise your hand using the dots, the 3 dots on your screen, just so I can see it and then be able to call on you appropriately. Councilman Streeter.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chief, I was wondering if there is a particular track that officers get on that lead them to the higher ranks, or how are they assigned in the beginning? Is it their choice to go into a particular unit?
Typically, what officers will do is they will request, like if there's a vacancy announcement to the homicide division, we frequently put out transfer opportunities because we have a lot of officers that retire or leave for other reasons. And so we're always putting out transfer opportunity notices. And the process with that is the officers have to indicate a desire to go to that particular unit. And what they will do is they will go through an interview process. And then based on the interview process, they are ranked in order of performance. And then based on the number of vacancies that exist, they will take officers off that list. Now that list is only good for 6 months. So every 6 months, the commands will go through that interview process. And what that does is it allows somebody that may not have been eligible to transfer the previous interview held, that person will not be able to compete in the next go around. Unfortunately, given our manpower and well, particularly now with COVID, we have not had that process run, but that's the process that that will take place. And so I'll use an example if I can. I was once questioned. Actually, I was told that when I was overseeing the Bureau of Investigation, I was questioned why there was only one Hispanic officer in the gang unit. And so what I did was I walked over to our announcements and showed that we didn't have Hispanic officers requesting to be transferred into the gang unit. And a transfer like that into a unit like that, the people that request to go to a gang unit are people that have a passion for that. Our gang unit officers are known to receive death threats. So you have family members that don't want officers to request a transfer to the gang unit. So sometimes we'll see discrepancies in numbers within units because officers are just not interested in that particular position.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We're gonna ask one more question. I just want to note that it's 4:30, everyone, and we're on our first section. And so we're gonna take one more question, and then we're gonna go on to the next section. Mr. Ross.
There's a huge disparity between the officers, and I want to look at this appointment one. What did the FOP have to do with whether you change from being tested to be a captain or being appointed? Because I remember that discussion when McGaw was there. We talked about it, but I didn't realize that the FOP was involved in that. So why would it? Because it's not. They don't get. You cut it off at lieutenant as far as them getting overtime and pay, and you become a manager. So who determined the structure of the FOP, or does the county?
Well, what I can tell you is I was not involved in any of those discussions, so I don't know how those discussions, played out. But I do know that the FOP was involved in the discussions, and for some reason, that's the reason why it did not go any further than that. That's not to say that it can't be revisited. And maybe that's a recommendation that comes from the task force. I don't know, but it's something worth looking into.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Let's move on to the next section, please.
Okay, so the next section will be, is that you? Oh, I'm sorry. Let's move over to, yeah. thought I was done. So wanted to talk about our COPS officers quickly. We have 64 COPS officers that are assigned to the various districts. And as you can see, the demographics of the COPS officers are listed there: 30 African-American males, 12 African-American females, 14 white males, and 6 Hispanic males, 2 Asian males. And those officers are dispersed throughout the county, working in one of the 8 district stations. Next slide. Okay. So at this point, I will turn it over to Deputy Chief Robert Harbin.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to have Major Alexander go over the Training and Education Division. Major Alexander.
All you guys can't be in the same room at the same time. Operating these things. Mr. Alexander, Major Alexander, you're hopping on? We can't hear you.
Okay, the major's going to be using my computer, guys.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Alexander. I'm the commander of the training division. In the interest of
Mr.
my peers,
we're going to have to ask the gentleman that sat at your seat to either mute his thing or turn off the screen, because we can hear the echo still.
I think we might have resolved the issue. So again, my name is Bill Alexander. I'm the commander of the training division. I'm going to try to save some time for my peers who I know have a lot to say behind me. I'm going to go through my slides relatively quickly. I want you all to know that I could talk for days about training. I've tried to tailor my points specifically to what I see going on in the national conversation about what lots of folks nationally are talking about, what they would like to see in terms of police training. So if you have questions about something that's not on the slide, either connect with me afterwards or obviously ask me a question here. So Prince George's County is currently staffed to have 3 full-time academy classes at any on average per class. That's about 9 months, and it's almost twice what NPTC Training Commission mandates in terms of required training. And that is not accounting for what I should have added on there was an additional 240 to 300 hours of field training that's required after you graduate. So for most recruits, it takes them about a year to become fully certified to be a police officer on their own. And I know nationally there's lots of conversations about some departments certify police officers in just a matter of a few weeks. That is not what is going on here in Prince George's County. And another point I wanted to bring up is that Prince George's County trains most of the municipalities in Prince George's County. And the idea behind that is that it serves as a strong foundation for everyone who is showing up on the potentially chaotic scene to understand what, so next slide, please. That's just a very broad overview of what we do in terms of the number of hours per subject. I won't go through each of those individually. So I thought these were probably the topics you all would have questions about. These are definitely areas that we cover and have been covering for many years. So domestic violence, workplace harassment, equal opportunity, emergency petitions, mental health and crisis intervention. That's a big one that's been a national conversation. Implicit bias training with Dr. Marsh from the University of Maryland. Active threat training, which I know you all know is a continuing subject of concern across the nation. And as one note, in the past, we have sent all police officers to the Holocaust Museum as part of a sort of educational behavioral thing. And now recently we've transitioned to the National Museum of African American History. We've gotten a lot of great feedback on that, and I think it's very successful. Next slide. We use the ICAT model of use of force procedures. It's a national model. It's recommended by PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum. It stands for Integrating Communications, Assessment, and Tactics. In short, what it really means is officers are trained to use time, distance, and cover to give them options, hopefully options to reduce or eliminate their need to use force. Next slide. Is this slide broken? Well, just in, here we go. As part of that training, we use something called a Milo machine. It's an interactive video scenario based machine where students stand in front of a video, which the instructors can change based on how they're interacting with the video. And we also do live action scenarios for multiple weeks across the academy. And the primary driver of these scenarios, both the video and in person, is to teach officers and then ultimately evaluate them on their ability to de-escalate situations. Next slide. We cover an extensive amount of mental health crisis intervention style training. It's all on the screen there, but we're talking about citizen interactions, courtesy, use of force. Kevin Davis and Hank Stawinski both were instrumental in implementing an Arrive Alive program. A number of police officers in Prince George's County died as a result of car accidents. So for a number of years, we've been teaching that. Implicit bias and bias-based policing has been a big push for us under the leadership of Dr. Marsh from the University of Maryland again. So all of these topics are heavily covered and reinforced in our academy training. Next slide. And finally, everything I've talked about up till now has been what we refer to as basic officer training. So in other words, the basic academy where a citizen comes in, has no police experience. As far as advanced officer training, we do recurringly cover a lot of these various topics. One of the things we did in 2017 was we adopted and taught it's called EPIC training. Ethical policing is courageous. It was developed by the New Orleans Police Department. They've had a lot of success with it. Basically, it teaches officers that they have a duty to intervene when they see one of their fellow officers, perhaps beginning to step over the line or get emotionally involved in a scene. And this training itself has also been incorporated into our various scenarios, both in the basic side and recurring scenarios that we do every single year in annual in-service training. Next slide. And that does it for training. I know that was very fast, but I'm trying to save time for my peers, but I'm happy to answer any questions if I did not hit a topic that you wish I would have talked.
No, that's great. And I want to just be mindful, everybody, that the chief will be leaving at 5. Can you guys hear me? Can everybody hear me? The chief will be leaving.
Hold on just a second, Delegate Washington. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I think everyone else can hear me. Chief, can you hear me?
I got you now, sir.
Okay, perfect. So I wanted to, I see Judge Lamassney's want to ask a question. Anyone else just raise their hand or place in a chat, and I will call him. Judge Lamassney?
Yeah, is there a specific annual training requirement, a certain number of hours a year, or a certain number of topics a year after that first year is completed?
Yes, ma'am. MPCTC requires 18 hours of annual in-service for Maryland police officers. Here in Prince George's County, we do 30 hours of in-classroom training, and then we do an additional 10 hours at the range. So a total of 40 hours for Prince George's County.
Per year, per officer. Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
We have a few other questions. I'm going to go to Ms. Josephine Morning. Ms. Morning, you want to unmute yourself, please?
Thank you so much. I have a question in reference to the implicit bias training.
Yes, ma'am.
So also, are they required to, I understand you said that they go through this every year, this training every year, they're required to, each officer. Did I understand you to say that?
Major, can you go back to the slide that shows the annual reoccurring trainings? Because I think that's what Ms. Morning is referring to.
Yes. Okay, yes, the implicit bias training by Dr. Marsh. So do they go through this every year? Each officer has to go through this training each year?
Well, to be clear, every single officer, every sworn officer has to go through annual training as required by MPTC. And then of course we add additional hours on that. These topics that I have on this slide here are actually recurring topics, but they are not each taught annually, just because we're constrained in terms of our overall amount of training time. So for instance, CPR is taught every 2 years. There's almost always some mental health related class every single year, but they might not be the same mental health class, if that makes sense. So 1 year we might do something specific to autism. 1 year we might do something related to emergency petition service. So everything you see on here, our general rule of thumb is that each one of these should be taught at a minimum of once every 3 years. I would say to you, historically, most of these topics have been covered more than that, but that is sort of our rule of thumb.
Is it mandatory that each officer actually go through this training, or is it at their will?
Oh, no, ma'am. This is mandatory. They're ordered to come to training and they have to attend every single class. We document and certify that they have attended every class. And if they do not attend one or more classes, then their Maryland certification is temporarily paused, and they cannot do any police work until they've resolved whatever classes they missed.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, Major, can you just give us a breakdown, maybe the last 2 years of the amounts of like what trainings were mandatory for officers, since it's on a rotating basis? On the slide, you really can't get a grasp of what trainings actually occurred or actually are occurring or required each and every year. So we would like something more detailed about
Sure.
what trainings are done. So let me go to the next question. We have Crystal Oriata.
Thank you. And thank you for that question. That was part of mine, like a breakdown that would allow us to really get a visual of, even if you want to do a snapshot over the last 3 years, that we can really see every year. And then another question, for some of these trainings, I see like the breakdown of partnerships with outside organizations versus them being internally taught by officers, and then how often are the different trainings updated, the actual curriculum being revisited?
Sure. Both for the basic side and the advanced officer training, our curriculum, we do an update every single year. There's usually a pause in the annual in-service training about November, and then we start again usually in February or March. So there's a few months there where all the instructors, their task is to go out there and find what the best information is, the best practices, and then incorporate that into our training. For lots of the things that sort of are outside experts that we call in, for instance, the implicit bias training with Dr. Marsh, almost all of the mental health stuff we do, we use outside professionals. Partially outside professionals. For instance, most of the mental health block, including the autism block and mental illness and dementia and dealing with sort of crisis intervention style training, is either taught by the Sante group, which I'm sure you all are familiar with as part of the county organization. We call them the SAM 800 units, and they respond as mobile crisis teams. They teach a big portion of that mental health block. And then also internally, we have a licensed clinician, LaJoy Preston. She teaches the bulk of the remaining mental health portion. So it's not a police officer teaching them about mental illness. It's outside. I say outside, but obviously LaJoy Preston works for the police department, but civilian experts in their field who are teaching police officers the real world meat and potatoes of how mental health impacts the community and how we can best serve them in terms of our interactions.
And can we get a breakdown of that as well? Like which one of these were outside organizations?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Ms. Oriata. And can you also send us I'm not sure if we have this in our packet, but the hiring, the training notebook that you guys go by, just so the manual or something that we can go back to and review. And actually not the manual, but maybe a briefing document, if you will. I think that'd be really helpful. I'm gonna go to our next question. I'm gonna go to folks who have not asked a question yet. So I'm gonna go to Delegate Fisher first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that breakdown. I really want to dive into what the difference is between training and departmental policy. So you talked a little bit about, the training that's around excessive use of force, and in our own county with Mr. Green was handcuffed in a passenger seat of a car and shot by one of our own officers. So obviously that training did not work there. So I want to know, how can you tell us the difference between something you train on and something that's departmental policy?
Sure. Well, in terms of the policy, the policy is oftentimes vetted. Well, I shouldn't say oftentimes, it is. I wasn't planning and research. It's vetted by the Office of Law. It's vetted by the Chief of Police. Each of the deputy chiefs reads the policy in terms of what it is we're putting on paper and how we want our officers to act or react. And it's also developed in terms of training, it's developed with our content experts internally on the training side. So there's a unit within training called the Specialized Training Unit. There's currently 4 gentlemen assigned to that unit, and they really are use of force experts. They go to a class called Force Science across the nation. Their entire job is to understand use of force, understand when officers are allowed to use it, understand when and how we might be able to not use force. And then it's their job to come up with the policies that match sort of the national best practices and what the law says. So it's a large combined effort. I understand what you're asking. How does policy match training or vice versa? But it really is a collaborative group effort in terms of what is our use of force policy and how then do we train that effectively to our officers.
And then if Mr. Chair will allow me a follow-up. So currently right now for our department, do we have a use of force policy that's codified for our police department?
Yes.
And I don't know if we've been sent that. So if you can send that, I would really appreciate that. And do you think, in your opinion, is there room to, I would say for me, I think training is great. I think we need more training, but I also come from a background, I think when that's the policy, that's the policy. And I think, do you feel like there's more room to codify some of our training as departmental policy? Or you think that the collaborative effort that you described is, I wouldn't say the best, but is like the most, I guess, productive way around use of force, in your opinion?
Well, I'm one of those guys that says we're never perfect. I think there's always some room for improvement, but I've been in training for almost 2 years now, and I've been on the department for almost 25. I've been really paying attention to the national conversation going on in terms of use of force and how officers use force. And I would strongly, strongly argue that what we are doing here in Prince George's County is, if not meeting, or if not beating, certainly meeting the best practices of any other law enforcement organization going on in the country. So that's
right.
The short answer.
But then
is,
how does a civilian get shot in a passenger seat? That's what I want to understand. Right.
Well,
so I think you need, I really, really want to see a copy of what's codified as our use of force.
Sure,
and then we can go from there. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll retain the rest of my questions.
No problem. Thank you. And I just want to warn our members of the work group that we have 3 more questions lined out, I think 4, and then we're going to go on to the next section. Okay. But we do want to, but I know that this is one of our heavy topics, and definitely is. So, which is why I'm saying let's everybody get a chance to ask the question. But they're going to come back at a certain point to answer questions, and we might just bring training back. We might bring others back depending on where the group wants to go. So I'm gonna go to Mr. Ross for a quick question, and then following Mr. Ross, we can go to Pastor Robinson.
I want to get back to the academy, and I visited the academy one time, and I noticed a distinct racial problem at the academy, and this is when it was on Forbes Boulevard. Yeah, it came to a T in the hallway, and when I looked to the right, there was all white officers, and when I looked to the left, there was all black officers. And as I walked up, the lieutenant, I think her name was Tibbs, she's since retired, she said, "You noticed the problem." So if there's a problem with the vision at the academy, how can you train individual ethnic group? How can you train that way? If you got a problem among the staff where you're not getting it and you discriminate there.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Ross. Well, certainly, I'm not aware of the specific incident you're referring to, and it's been a good number of years since Lieutenant Tibbs was here on the police department, so I suspect most, if not all, of the personnel who were there at that time have transferred or moved on to other units. Currently, both of the unit commanders, in terms of basic training and advanced officer training, both lieutenants are African-American females. I would say right now, probably 65 to 70% of my staff is African-American or minority. We talk all the time. I have an open dialogue about in terms of, are there issues going on in training and what sorts of problems are folks having? And that has never been brought to my attention, including the FOP shop steward who represents the entire unit of training is an African-American female, and she would not hesitate to tell me if she thought that there was some sort of racial issue going on at the academy. So as it stands today, I would argue to you that there is not such an issue, but you know, perhaps someone will say something differently.
No, we're not gonna argue. We just, that was my observation, because if the training was done the way, and I'm sort of with Juanita Fisher, Mr. Green incident would have never occurred. There's a breakdown in training somewhere. And we got to find out where that breakdown is, where people are violating the policies and also violating their work rules or the general order. So there's a real breakdown when there's an incident. And since we started this task force, we done had another incident, a police officer just beat guys up for no odd reason. So where is that responsibility? Who takes the hit on that? And to me, it's a training issue.
We might argue that the issue specific to Green is definitely a criminal matter. And you know, I think we as an organization would say to you, we feel like we are beating or leading the nation in terms of our training. And there are times, even with the best of training, that the folks that you are trying to indoctrinate into the correct processes still step out of the line. And obviously that's not a great answer in terms of our desire to be perfect in our response to law enforcement. So we are not in opposition to what you're saying. Obviously, we want our officers to perform the way we're instructing them. But people are human, and humans either make mistakes or sometimes step out of line purposely, and we can't always control that, even if it's codified in our general orders or it's what we've trained.
All right, so we're going to go to Pastor Robinson next. And what I am going to ask folks is if we can ask questions so we can get the answers for everyone, please. Thank you, Mr. Pastor Robinson.
Thank you, Delegate Washington. Major Alexander, specifically, as I understand it, that implicit bias is not mandatory, number one. Number two is de-escalation taught specifically. Those are the two questions I have. From what I understand, the implicit bias, the last class that we did, I think it was last year sometime, that this was optional. Specifically, is implicit bias optional or mandatory?
The implicit bias training, both on the basic side and the recurring annual in-service, is mandatory. I believe the incident you're referring to was a couple of years ago where the officers actually responded to the University of Maryland. Yeah. And I was not there at the time. I certainly wasn't in the classroom, but part of the problem there was that part of that training was asking officers to volunteer to be part of a study and use a virtual device and sort of role play in front of the class. And that part was optional. And I know a number of people opted out. But as far as the most recent training and every single basic recruit officer, the bias training is 100% mandatory. You must sit in the class and attend the class.
And the de-escalation, is there any specific training on de-escalation?
I mean, the de-escalation piece, there is a specific block of instruction on de-escalation, but it's also so interwoven in so many other contexts and classes of the training division that I wouldn't even be able to give you a hard number on the number of hours we teach it. I mean, every single scenario, every single topic, every single sort of how would you react in this situation is all interwoven with our basis foundation of find a way to de-escalate the scene, calm people down, keep your options open, and limit the times you use force. So yes, de-escalation is definitely taught across the county.
Thanks, and I think we should try to quantify that just so we know, because I think there's going to be questions later about the breakdown in each part of the sections of the training that occur. So if you can send us either a schedule, the amount of hours and time placed on each parts of the trainings, that would be really helpful. And I know Chief Velez wanted to hop in here real quick, really quick. Mr. Chief Velez, are you ready? Yes, and if we can stop sharing the screen for a second, just so people can see us talking back at home. Sharing the screen, just to make it a little bit easier. Chief Velez, go ahead.
Yes, so what I was going to say is we're more than happy to provide the curriculum.
We can't, Chief, we can't hear you. It's still low.
Okay, what I was saying is that we're more than happy to provide the curriculum for the training, so you know exactly.
Yeah. We can't hear you at all. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Got it.
There you go.
What I was saying is that we're more than happy to provide the curriculum so that your group can see exactly what the officers are receiving in terms of training. And what I did want to point out with the issue with use of force and the criminal act that occurred with the officer shooting Mr. Green in his car, that was a criminal act. That wasn't somebody that was even thinking about a use of force or engaging in trying to protect himself. From what we know at this point, that's what that is. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. And we're going to take the next question, which will be Ms. Florence. I saw your name. I saw you on here earlier, so just wanted to give you an opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much. So I very quickly, and this intersects with some of the questions that we already had. I was wondering what percentage of the training is interactive? Because I know that with a lot of training, we can sit in a room, have in-person training with the presenter, but with the nature of the police officer's work, I would imagine that this type of training, particularly the implicit bias and other types of training that is so important as far as the interaction with community members, that there be some level of interaction. So I was wondering how interactive the training is, and if it's all in person, is there any discussion about restructuring the training to make it more interactive so it can be more effective?
Lots of our training is very interactive. We have multiple weeks of various officer skill sort of assessments and testing. One is officer survival skills, and there's a basic survival skills week. There's another week where they sort of perform live action role playing. I mentioned before the Milo video scenario based thing. Lots of the mental health portions of the block are interactive. For instance, we bring in a group, the autism, I apologize, I forgot the name of the, maybe Lighthouse. They bring in folks with actual autism and they do some scenarios and interactions there. The Sante group does a piece called Hearing Voices, where they'll actually put headphones on the officers as they try to do a traffic stop, and then in the headphones, they're hearing voices to sort of give them a sense of people who might be experiencing that style of mental illness. So certainly not everything is interactive, but as much as we can make it interactive and give them the opportunity to perform what we're trying to teach them and then be able to give them feedback, lots of our police academy is very interactive.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go to Ms. Danso next.
Thank you, Delegate. Good afternoon, everyone. So I just have two quick questions. The first one is, Major, as part of the basic training, you mentioned the full day at the National Museum, the African American History Museum. Does that basic training curriculum include any sort of cultural sensitivity, or even more so specifically on, African American culture when considering, the composition of our county, but that sort of background or historical lessons behind the communities where, our officers are policing as a historical foundation, whether that's around police tensions or information around, the communities themselves. I'd like to know if our basic training includes some of that. That's the first question. And the second question is just around a recurring theme that came up from our community around the CALIA standards. So can you talk about that accreditation in terms of how that plays into departmental training, if at all?
I apologize, we're having some audio issues here. So if I understood your questions, you have two questions. One is, do we teach cultural awareness, and specifically, do we teach African-American cultural awareness? And then the second piece was accreditation.
Yeah,
I have that right?
Based on the CALIA accreditation, the national standard around police accreditation. That seems to be a recurring question that had come up, that I guess the department once had it, but no longer does not. So I'd like to know if that plays into our current training.
Okay, sure. We do teach a cultural awareness class that touches on a broad spectrum of issues across cultures, and certainly African American culture is a part. Two of our classes now have gone to the African American Museum in DC.
Chief, you want to hop in?
In DC. I don't know.
Major, Major, you're
you could come away from that experience not having a keen sense. Frozen? Still here?
Yes, you're good now. Yep. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm not sure where I lost you, but I was just saying when we go to the National Museum of African American History, it's very impactful. I've gone, 2 of our classes have gone. I just don't know how you could go visit that institution and not come away with a very, very keen, perhaps new understanding of African American culture as it's progressed over the last more than 100 years in this country. So as far as cultural awareness, yes, we teach it. We do not teach a singular, specific, or separate class for that. Accreditation, as you mentioned, we did previously have CALIA accreditation. I don't know how strongly, if at all, that impacted our training curriculum. Our training curriculum has only progressed since we had the accreditation. So since we aren't currently CALIA certified, I can't tell you if some version of that would affect how we are or have been training. But as I sit here today, not to my knowledge, I don't know that they would greatly impact us because, again, I feel like we're already, we're not perfect, but I feel like we're doing a really, really good job, especially in the context of looking at what the conversation is directing folks to think about and talk about across the nation. Every single one of those topics that I've seen mentioned as should be required training for the police department, not only are we teaching now, but we have been teaching for years. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you for your responses.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna let that live for now, man. Can we go to Ms. Jackson, please?
Thank you, Delegate Washington. Major, just a quick question. You were moving so quickly through those blocks of training. I think you hit on duty to intervene or duty to report as it relates officer to officer. And so what I want to know is it both? Is it that you teach both that officers should intervene and report? And then is that codified in terms of policy, and is it in the general orders for both duty to intervene and duty to report?
Yes, both, absolutely, 100%. They absolutely have a responsibility to intervene if they see another officer doing wrongdoing. They also absolutely have to have a duty to report any wrongdoing that they have observed. Sort of separate, but sort of related is, as you probably know already, every single use of force in Prince George's County by a police officer is investigated, no matter how minor. Anything above what we call an unresisted escort. So if I was to make an arrest and the person is relatively compliant, basically compliant, and I'm just holding their wrist as I walk them towards their car, that we would not consider a use of force. But if I'm holding their wrist and they're even doing something as minor as slightly trying to pull away, we call that a use of force. And then everything above that. So every single use of force was reported and fully investigated, but independent of that, yes, officers.
So while frozen,
intervenes in various versions of our, I don't know that it's explicitly written. You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
You're not
Joys
here.
of technology.
I just wanted to follow up real quick. So the duty to intervene relates to use of force. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
More than just use of force, I think that they have a duty to intervene, even if it's something less than force, but behaviorally. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I have a question before we go on to the next one. My question is about the cultural competency training, and you mentioned earlier because you've done some of this cultural competency stuff in the past, and you go to a museum that these folks are culturally competent. How are you measuring cultural competency after this training, and how often is that survey or test provided to be able to assess if they're actually culturally competent? Everybody else heard me on that question? Chief, did you hear me on that question?
I caught part of it.
Okay, let me just ask it again. I wanted to know how do you assess cultural competency amongst your force? Just having the trainings doesn't mean that they're culturally competent. Just going to a museum doesn't mean they're culturally competent. What assessment do you have that indicates that your officers are culturally competent?
Okay. The connection on my specific computer seems a little laggy, but if you the connection on my specific computer seems a little laggy, but if you can hear me, I don't know that we have a mechanism to sort of capture the broad data that you're talking about. I mean, in terms of the basic training and on the annual in-service side, we do tests for the classes that we offer, but that's not going to measure if we're actually impacting our members in terms of, you know, what you're describing as cultural competency. So there's no current mechanism in place that I'm aware of that would capture, you know, data across a broad spectrum of people to sort of measure, have their behaviors change? Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? You know, one might be citizen.
I think that's really
complaints, or one metrics might be internal discipline, but
I think that's really important information to capture, because if you're assessing your training and whether or not your training is effective, it'll behoove the police department to really assess that, if that's actually happening and if that's occurring, and if minds and mindsets change. I'm seeing that the internet's going off. Everybody?
Yeah, the internet is flaky here for us.
Okay, so let's go on to the next question. The last question on this section, we're going to go back to one follow-up, and I believe that was Miss Josephine Morning. And then we're going to go to the next. Then we're going to go to the next topic. And I know folks still have a lot of answers, a lot of questions. So if you guys can send this information, and then we'll have you back soon, and we'll send more questions your way too. So Miss Josephine, can you close us out, please?
I sure will. Thank you so much. I have a question. When did they start with the procedures of putting alleged prisoners in front seats of the cars? I've always remembered them being put in the back seat. So can you tell me when this new procedure came about with them putting alleged prisoners in the front seat?
Sure. Well, I've been on the department for almost 25 years, and the standard policy for the entire time that I've been on the police department is that you put the person, your arrestee subject, in the front seat. And for the beginning portion of my career, the reason for that is that because we did not have, they're called cages, but I think that's a bad term. There are forcible barriers between the front seat and the back seat. For a few middle years, we did have these blocking devices where we could put someone in the back seat. But the problem is that once you inserted those devices, one, it shortened the space of the driving space in front and really cramped officers. And the back seat was even more cramped. If you were being arrested and I was to put you in the back seat with that, what we call a cage in there, it was incredibly cramped, very uncomfortable, and in some cases injuring folks. So we ultimately got away from that. So the reason that we put the subject in the front seat is for safety purposes. For instance, if they start to try to take their seatbelt off and get out of the car while we're driving, we want to be able to see that and sort of
I'm sorry, he
intervene and stop whatever their actions are. Also, there is some have a barrier, and you taking action to sort of attack you or escape, and you wouldn't even be aware. So if they were somehow able to get their hands and undo their seatbelt, they could reach up there somehow or kick you or something, and it would be very difficult as you're driving in the front seat to sort of combat whatever that action is. So for those reasons and more, we put them in the front seat so we can constantly observe them, see what it is they're doing, keep them safe in the car so they don't escape, all those kinds of things. Does that answer your question?
But this has not proven effective, because I've seen alleged prisoner steal the car, steal the police car sitting up front. And I've seen, there's been a lot of incidents with the fact that they're sitting up front. This is why I can't understand why they would go to that. But I understand what you're saying. If the police car has enough room in the back seat, I don't see why they would be cramped up. Just right. Okay.
We're going to go on to the next section, but I did see a question in the chat about training directed specifically at interactions with children and youth. Can you please get us that information? And are you teaching 21st century policing, the 6 pillars? If you can get us some information back on that. So we'll have you back. And at the end, we're going to still ask questions. So we'll come back to the section, but let's reshare the screen and let's move on to the next section, please. Because we are at 5:11 and we're only on section 2, or 5:13, and we're only at section 2. So So let's go to the next section, please.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Someone has the presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go start with recruiting. Go to the next slide, please, Mr. Lee. Our primary goal is to identify and employ the best.
We don't have the screen. We don't have the shared
We're
screen.
looking at your channel.
No, Alan has to share the screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're having a few technical difficulties over here.
Y'all having a lot of technical difficulties over
All right. Can everyone see?
Yep.
All right. The county's recruiting, our primary goal is to identify and employ the best candidates available. We're committed to recruiting and selecting the most qualified applicants while maintaining a complement that is reflective of our community. We can go to the next slide, please.
Move the camera away from you, so looking at your channel.
It's on you now, so the camera's on you.
With yours, you gotta push
Oh,
it back.
okay.
So looking at your mouth as you're talking.
Oh, okay. All right, are we back? Okay. Again, continue with our recruiting. Some of the efforts that we're doing, all our cops officers are providing, handing out flyers to the community when they're attending community events and meetings to potential applicants. In addition, we have flyers that are going around to each of the district stations, indicating employment opportunities within the police department.
Commander, can you go back to the previous slide? I don't think we heard what that was about when you talked about recruiting. I think you kind of went fast on that first slide, on the first recruiting slide.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yep.
We talked. Okay. These right here, Delegate Washington, are again our goals of the Prince George's County Recruiting Unit. We seek to identify and employ the best candidates available. Yeah, better? Okay. We're committed to recruiting and selecting the most qualified applicants while maintaining a complement that is reflective of our community. Did everyone hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, all right. Go to the next slide. Some of the efforts that we've done, we've had our community police officers provide flyers to potential applicants during community events. In addition, we've reached out to area colleges within the DMV, within the county high schools. We have the cadet program, which we're introducing individuals to the law enforcement, as well as we're looking at military institutions through their transition assistant program. So those that are actually transitioning out of the military can seek opportunities within the police department. Next slide. Some of the things that we do during events, we're handing out souvenirs at the job fairs. We've recently just purchased 15 billboards through our Clear channel, and we actually have BMS boards throughout the county advertising that we're have openings within the county. All recruiting vehicles have also been upgraded and wrapped with recruiting and hiring graphics to promote hiring within our police agency. I want to touch on the brief overview of our hiring process, which includes the APRT exam, which is our applicant physical requirement test, as well as a written examination. This initially starts with the applicant. It's a self-initiated by the applicant. Applicants can access the online job announcement via the website. So everything is done online, virtually online, and it's open all year long. We budgeted for 5 classes a year, and we typically are seeking to get at least 20 to 25 applicants for our agency. Next slide, please. Once the application is received through the system NeoGov, the application is actually checks the application for completeness and ensures all relevant questions are answered. Once the applicant meets the standards, they're invited to schedule for the physical exam. And this process normally takes about 1 to 2 days. Approved applicants are notified via email of their scheduled tests and provided weekly updates telling them that the time that their exam is scheduled. They must bring a medical waiver by the personal care provider in order to participate. And during that APRT exam, applicants are required to run a 1.5 mile run, do sit-ups and push-ups. This is all based on the age group, and upon successful completion, they'll be allowed to take the written exam at that time. Next slide. Once the written exam is administered, I won't read necessarily bullet every single line in here, but the applicants must score at least a 70 or above to pass. And this written score is good for at least 1 year. Upon completion of the APRT and written exam, the applicant file is then sent to the background unit where a preliminary review is done, the polygraph and psych exam is scheduled, oral board, ride along, and agency checks are conducted to include criminal history checks. Next slide, please. During this preliminary review, the case manager checks the applicant file for accuracy and assigns the case file to a background investigator. This process normally takes about a week. Next slide. During this initial interview, the applicant is scheduled within 48 hours. All relevant documentation is then presented to the investigator for review. The applicant will be asked a series of questions that will be compared to their preliminary questionnaire. At that time, everything will be clarified and the polygraph and psych exam is then scheduled. Okay. During the polygraph and psych exam, the applicant must successfully pass both the polygraph and psych exam to proceed. If an applicant fails to pass either the polygraph or psych exam, they are then non-selected at that time and they have to wait at least a year to reapply for our agency. This exam normally takes about 2 hours each for each exam, and then those results are then passed along to the investigator. The next step in our process is the oral board. This oral board consists of a lieutenant or above, and as well as three commanders, 2 of which must be a lieutenant above, and then we have 1 officer, the rank of sergeant or below. In addition to the oral board, the applicants are required to participate in a ride along, and this gives them the opportunity to see if they get a feel for the job. We've had a few applicants that upon taking a ride along with the officer elected not to proceed with a career in law enforcement. So we think this is very important for potential applicants to see exactly what they're getting into when applying for it to our agency. Upon successful completion of the oral board, the applicant's file is then entered into field work. During that field work, that's when the investigators go out, they're doing neighborhood canvasses, interviews of family members, as well as interviews of references as well. Next slide. Also during our process, we have a medical examination, and all potential applicants are sent to Concentra. They're signed, and then upon receipt of the medical clearance, they're presented to the investigator, and then the case file is presented to the deputy chief. During the applicant case review, the investigator must submit the applicant file to the OIC of the background unit for review. This file is then presented to the commander of the background for review, and it kind of acts as a peer review before being presented to a deputy chief. We kind of see this as a layer, a multifaceted layer, in which the case file is reviewed by several individuals before it's presented before the deputy chiefs for hire. The next slide. During the deputy chief review, the applicant file was received by the deputy chief of Bureau of Administration. And a file review is scheduled with all the deputy chiefs within the police department. The investigator is assigned to go over the file. There's a report of investigation that's written. Upon hearing the report of investigation, the deputy chiefs are then given the opportunity to ask questions, and then there's a vote at the end of the presentation. The deputy chiefs, barring that we have at least two out of the three deputy chiefs that concur with the applicant proceeding, that file will then be forwarded to personnel. And I'm open for any questions in regards to our recruiting process. I know it was quick, but in the interest of time, wanted to get us through.
No, thank you for that. We really appreciate that. Do we have any questions? I didn't see anybody in the chat just yet. So I'm just gonna ask, I see you, Crystal. I'm just gonna ask a couple of questions myself first, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
Can we, when you do your recruiting, who are you looking for? What type of applicants are you looking for? And are you going to historically Black colleges and universities to recruit? That's it. That's my question. And I have a follow-up to that.
Yes, sir. Well, actually, we're going to all colleges and universities. Actually, my recruiters, we hit all the HBCUs in the area. So when I say what we're looking for the best qualified applicants in the area. Typically, we target those that are in the criminal justice program because we tend to see that those are individuals that's interested in law enforcement. We also look into the military institution because we're a paramilitary organization, and law enforcement kind of attracts those individuals. So we found that to be most successful.
Yeah. And my follow-up to that would be, do you have a tracking list of where you recruit, where your recruits come from, or where sworn officers have come from, whether they came from these universities, whether they came from the community, whether they came from, wherever? Do you keep track of that? And if so, can we see that data?
Yes, sir. Yes, we do keep a track of that. So like the number of job fairs we have attended, yes, we do keep a track of that data, and I can certainly provide that to you.
That's not what I'm asking. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking for the particular, like for your force, the people you hire for the last 3 recruiting classes or the last 5 recruiting classes. Where did you recruit them from? Where did they come from? And do you have that information and that data where they came from?
Yes, again, that's on the application. We can pull that data.
Okay.
So I was saying, whether we get it from a job fair or they're recruited from a particular college or fair, that's actually on the application. That's a question that's asked. How did you hear about our agency?
Got it. Okay, yeah, that'd be great information. And my last question before I go to Crystal, and I might have a follow-up too, is when was this recruiting and application process last updated? And the process in which you do this, what makes this the best recruiting tactic or the best application process? That's my question.
Okay, if I heard you correctly, what makes our application process the best process?
Here's the first question. When was the last time the recruiting and application process was updated in the police department?
Well, I don't have the specific date when we actually went online, but we used to have a paper process. So I know within the past 3 years, we actually went online to do everything online. So I don't know when we actually updated the process, but I can certainly look into that information and get you that date.
Thank you. And then I guess my follow-up to that is what makes this the best recruiting tactics and what makes this the best application process? And because it seems like a very long application process. We just want to know what makes this the best, and have you compared it to other organizations or other departments that do this types of that other organizations?
Yes, well, most our recruiters work with other recruiters from other agencies. They typically talk monthly because we're all facing challenges in regards to recruiting the best qualified applicants for agencies. So typically each agency, we're pretty much all doing the same thing. And we've looked at, there's a group that meets monthly that we're a part of to discuss the best tactics to recruit officers in law enforcement. So we're following the best practices that we're getting from these meetings that we're going to monthly. So we're steady evolving. I mean, as new innovative ways come to change our recruiting process, we're open to that, and we're looking to change accordingly.
Okay, I'm gonna go to Miss Crystal Oriata for a question.
Thank you, Delegate. So my first question is around, and correct me if I have the terminology or the name of the system incorrect. I think it's called a link system that tracks interactions that individuals have with the police. And it's something that not all jurisdictions have, but it's something that I think we use here in Prince George's County. And it's something also used to determine hiring. So one, I guess verification that statement is true. And then the second point, I'm just curious of, do you track data of how many people have been denied because of this system? And because from my understanding, it tracks anytime someone's entered into the system, any interaction versus just if it led to a charge or, and if that's not the case, any clarification around that would be helpful as well.
Actually, we don't have any specific data as to if one system, the link system, specifically disqualifies an applicant, if that was your question. But what would happen if there was data within links, the investigator would investigate further to say if someone had gotten stopped in links. That investigator would then ask that applicant additional information and follow up on that incident that was placed in links. So that just because you're on links, that wouldn't necessarily disqualify you from becoming a police officer alone on itself.
Okay. And the follow-up question is for the mental health evaluation. I'm not sure if this process has always been this way, that it's like a pass or fail. And if it's a pass or fail, for fail, is there the reason for the fail notated? And if so, has that always been the case, or has there been a transition on how you're tracking the pass and fail mechanism for the mental health evaluation?
Yes, well, it is a pass or fail. And as to why they fail, that isn't shared with the investigator. That's kept separate and apart from itself. So that when they go to do the psychological exam, that examiner is not influenced by the investigator. So that's separate within itself. It is a pass or fail. And they don't get into specifics as to why that person.
And has that always been the case? That it's been a pass fail with no notation of why the fail?
Well, there's been no notation that's provided to the investigator. I believe that may have to do something with HIPAA laws, but I can certainly look into that further.
Okay. And then just the last question, can we see the breakdown of how many people have been, I guess, denied in the employment process by these different requirements that you have set forth? Like, for example, if it's the background and interaction with police versus mental health, or do you track like how you're denying people?
Oh yes, we can certainly provide that data to you.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank
you. Thank you. Do you have any other questions? I see Ms. Pruitt asked a question about what are the challenges that you are being faced in recruiting?
I'm sorry, Delegate Walsh, I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
I'll say it again. The question was asked, what are the challenges that are being faced in recruiting?
Well, some of the faces, with everything going on, civil unrest throughout the country, a lot of people who would have been interested in law enforcement are now turning away from joining law enforcement agencies. So that's probably the biggest challenge that we're facing now. A number of people don't, it's not attractive to become a law enforcement officer during this period.
How did you quantify that, sir?
I'm sorry?
How did you quantify that? What data do you have that supports that?
Well, we've seen the numbers, the number of applications, the number of applicants that we're getting, and just from interviewing people on the street, that's what we get. That's what my recruiters are getting.
Okay, all right. Any other questions? I do have a quick question for you about what happens right now? We've had this issue in the country about former officers or officers of other agencies transferring to different agencies within the country. What is the process for a former officer or a officer from a different department? Do they go through the same recruiting process? Do they go through the same application process, same background check? And do you have access to their personnel files in the other departments?
Yes, they go through a similar background check with an experienced police officer who elects to come to our agency. Only thing different, if they're already NPCTC certified, then they don't have to go through a full academy. But we do gain access to their internal affairs files. There's agency checks done on anybody that comes over from another agency.
So the law that prevents the public from reviewing personnel files, that doesn't pertain to the police department.
We're allowed to, we have a relationship with other agencies. We're allowed to review their internal affairs files. Yes.
By law, that's the case. You're able to do.
Yo, we have to get their permission, sir. We actually get their permission.
You have to get the
sign off. From the applicant. We tell them that we're going to look at your personnel, and they sign off that it's okay for us to review their file.
And if that person says no, do you still hire that person?
No, not necessarily. No, because that's part of our vetting process.
Okay. So every applicant, every former person, they've always said no, or they always said yes, but if they said no,
yes. To my knowledge, we haven't had anyone to turn us down from looking at their agency file.
Okay, great. Can I have the last question on this? I think Miss Felix Lawson. Sorry, Florence.
Hi, no problem. Just very quickly, I want to ask, how meaningfully does the recruitment process measure an individual's commitment to public community service? Since police officers are public servants, how much of that is woven into the process?
Well, part of the recruiting process, when they start the applicant is required to write an essay. And during that essay, that kind of measures what that applicant's desire is when they become a police officer. Typically, we found that a number of people that apply to the agency, their desire is to serve the community. So we measure that based off their written paragraph that they provide to us, as well as during the whole process when they're interacting with the investigators, when we go out and do neighborhood canvases and speak to people in the community. That's how we measure their potential commitment to our community.
Okay, thank you.
All right, last question here. I didn't see anybody else in the chat asking any questions just yet, but my last question is, can you send us the process for what you guys do for recruiting, and then I guess the step-by-step process and how the application process works and how long it takes? Can you send us that, please?
Yeah.
And then Crystal and Ms. Oriata, I'm gonna come right back to you for the last question. Last question, and we have these folks here still. We have them here still.
I appreciate it. It just sparked a question through the conversation. Is there any way, because I know you talk about the investigation, is there just a blanket, if you have a record, you cannot be an officer, or if it's juvenile offense or younger offense or type of offense? Is there any breakdown of that information that we could obtain?
We have, as far as depending upon the offense, will determine whether or not you can actually become, a police officer. Obviously, if you have a felony conviction, depending upon the nature of the felony, then that would actually, we go by NPCTC standards in order for you to become a police officer. If you don't meet those standards, then you may be disqualified. And I can certainly send you those standards to COMAR.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Because you said, just to understand, if some of it's left to interpretation, or no, it's just like these sets of crimes you're eligible, these sets you're not, or is there a level of interpretation there?
Well, it would depend on the level of crime. Again, that would all, the applicant doing the application, they're allotted to state, okay, if you got arrested for homicide, for instance, that would disqualify you from becoming a police officer.
Right.
Certain crimes of which you're automatically not allowed to become a police officer. So with that, I can share certain information with you and send that to you.
Thank you.
Last question is, do we prioritize county resident applicants? Also, do we incentivize the hiring of officers who speak languages other than English?
Yes, we do have incentives for officers that are bilingual. And as far as incentivize, as far as the county residents, what we do is we concentrate on this area first within the DMV. Prince George's County is priority, and then we go outside to the DMV to whether it be the district in Virginia. So yes, we do seek to gather people within this community first, and then go outside.
So thank you for this. Thank you for your time, sir. You know, the last thing is that if you can send us a breakdown of how many officers actually live in the county, that would be great to have. And so we did ask a few requests already. So hopefully someone's. I see Miss Major Smith.
Yes, we have notes.
I see Major Smith taking notes. So if you guys can get that back to us, we appreciate it. So let's go back to the slides, and let's go to the next presentation, next section, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I am Major James McCrary. I am the commander of the Internal Affairs Division. And today I'm going to go through our complaint process and a little bit of our early warning system, just so you guys have an idea of that. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is our complaint process in a nutshell. And what I'm going to do is just run you through this flow chart. As you can see, it is a complex and in-depth process. And I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions as we go through this. So feel free to ask at the end or as I'm explaining it. The goal of the Prince George's County Police Department when it comes to internal investigations or any complaints is to ensure that we investigate all complaints and we investigate them thoroughly and impartially to their completion. We accept all manner and form of complaints. Our preferred method of accepting a complaint form is through our complaints against police practices form. But we often find that citizens are either unable to fill out the form or unwilling to fill out the form. So we accept complaints via telephone. We'll accept them via email. We also work with our partners in the community, with the NAACP through the Citizens Complaint Oversight Panel. We also get complaints through the county exec's office and several other venues. So we'll have individuals and partners within our community that will forward us complaints, and we'll accept those complaints on the individual's behalf through those organizations. We're currently working on a system where individuals can make their complaints through our county website. What would happen is they go to the county website, they would click on the link, it would bring up the complaint form, and they could fill out that information. And we're also going to ensure that we have a portion there where anonymous complaints can still be filed through that method and manner, because we often have individuals that want to report police misconduct or want to report something that they've experienced, but often are uncomfortable leaving their name and information. Once we receive the complaint, regardless of where the complaint is sent or whether it's in person or to one of the district stations, it would go down to the middle where the diamond is. They all come to Internal Affairs. And once they come to Internal Affairs makes that determination on whether the complaint is going to be investigated by a supervisor or if it's going to be investigated by Internal Affairs. Internal Affairs reserves the right to investigate the more serious allegations, things like criminal misconduct, serious administrative issues where the officer would receive serious suspensions, fines, reduction in rank, or termination. There are 4 things that Internal Affairs always investigates: cases of harassment, abusive language, criminal misconduct, and use of force. I'll get more into that section, but I'm going to move over to the right into the supervisory portion. The reason we break it down in this manner is because we want to afford our supervisors the opportunity to impact and influence the officers under their command. We want them to mentor, and we want them to be aware of any infractions that occur with the officers under their command. Another reason that we reserve the right to, or that we afford the supervisors the opportunity to investigate these issues is because it gives an immediate connection between the citizen that made the complaint and an officer within their community. When these complaints are made and a supervisor is someone that rectifies the issue and addresses the complaint made by the public, we've seen that being very effective with our community policing model. That citizen has a personal contact that they can reach out to in their community, and they're not only reporting criminal misconduct in those situations, they're reporting incidents that occur in the community when it comes to crime, when it comes to things that they're experiencing, and we want to make sure that avenue is open. We also want to make sure that all complaints are investigated, and allowing the supervisor to investigate those complaints gives us another method in which to ensure that all complaints are looked into. Again, we reserve the serious, complex, in-depth investigations for internal affairs. Supervisors are only given cases that are simple, non-complex. Some examples of what a supervisor would investigate is an officer coming late to work, failure to appear in court, departmental accidents, minor courtesy violations, things that supervisors are capable and trained to investigate. Once internal affairs determines that an investigation is going to be a supervisor assigned investigation, it's usually assigned to the lowest level supervisor, which in most cases is a sergeant. There are instances where a lieutenant may investigate the case or a captain may investigate the case, but in most circumstances, it's going to be that first line supervisor. Once the supervisor investigates the case, they compile all the information that they can amass. They're looking for body camera video. If it's a departmental accident, they're making sure they're taking pictures, they're getting measurements. If it's a courtesy violation or a complaint that comes from a citizen, they're interviewing the citizen, they're looking for witnesses, they're looking for any evidence that they can acquire that would allow them to come to a finding in the investigation. Once they have come to their finding, there's 4 ways they can close that case. It's going to be sustained, which is saying that based on the evidence that's provided, the investigation finds that the officer committed that offense. It can also be closed out unfounded, and unfounded says that based on the evidence, there's no facts of the case that show that this incident had occurred. And we often see that when it comes to video footage. We'll get a complaint that makes an allegation saying that something occurred, and it's on video that shows that the allegation never occurred. We also have closed out non-sustained. Non-sustained would be an incident where we can't prove or disprove that an allegation occurred. We'll see that often with our he said, she said. There's only one witness and only the officer's testimony, and the stories conflict, and we don't have any contradicting evidence that will enable us to sustain that violation. And the third way is exonerated. And that's saying that the allegation that occurred did happen, but the officer was in policy when it comes to that. So an example of something where an officer would be exonerated would be, we see that with use of forces quite often, where force was used, a person could or could not have been injured based on the allegations that they've made, but based on the circumstances and the facts of the case, the incident was exonerated because it shows that the officer operated within policy. Once they have their finding, all that is amassed and it goes through the chain of command. So there are several set of eyes on each of these investigations, even on the supervisory level. So it would go from that investigator that's the supervisor up to that person's lieutenant, to their captain, to their major, to the deputy chief, and then back to internal affairs for final review before we serve discipline. At each of those stages, it can go back to the officer for additional follow-up. It's reviewed to make sure that the case is investigated thoroughly and impartially. If there's any determination at any of those points that there need to be additional leads that need to be completed, it's sent back to the officer to follow up on it. Once it goes through that process and comes to internal affairs determines based on the incident if discipline is going to be assigned, if the charge is sustained. And we base that on our general orders manual. And we also have a folder that displays like discipline, which shows that for a specific infraction, what the discipline has been historically for that incident. Each case is unique, and each case is going to have its own several set of factors. There could be one initial allegation that's sustained, but there could be multiple additional allegations that could change the discipline. And of course, the circumstances can alter discipline. Once the discipline has been determined, internal affairs will send it back to that bureau. It'll go back down to the investigator, and they'll serve it to the officer for final discipline. Then two things can happen. The officer can either accept their discipline, or they can go to administrative hearing board to contest the facts of the case. An administrative hearing board is a quasi-judicial panel that observes some of the rules of evidence that occur in a judicial proceeding. One of the things, or the biggest difference between a court proceeding and an administrative hearing, is the burden of proof. The burden of proof for an administrative hearing board is preponderance of evidence, which basically, if you look at it from a scale of 100, if the threshold is, or the evidence shows that it's at 51%, that the officer more than likely committed this infraction, that charge is sustained. And that's the same burden of proof for our internal investigation. So it's just 51% to sustain a charge. The board is made up of 3 members. It has a major that is a permanent chair, a captain, which is a permanent co-chair, and a rotating officer of equal rank. The major and the captain are trained in the rules and procedures of an administrating hearing board, and they run that hearing board. Just like a court proceeding, there's a plaintiff side, which is usually has representation from the county, legal representation from the county that puts on their case and presents the facts. And there's a defense side, which also has another lawyer, which presents the facts on behalf of the officer. The officer can elect to have a member of their choosing. In every situation that I've seen, an officer elects to choose a lawyer to represent them. Just like in a court proceeding, they'll present all the evidence, they'll look at videos, they'll play witness statements, they'll play video recorded witness statements, they'll look at all the facts and circumstances of the case. And at the completion of that hearing, they come to a finding. And again, they look at the same findings of sustained, non-sustained, exonerated, and unfounded.
Major, I want to hop in here real quick. Thank you.
Yes, please.
For the presentation. Are you going to change a slide so we can see what you're actually saying? You have a slide with this, because you're giving us a lot of information here, which is great, but right, we can see it all and we're all digesting.
Yeah. Unfortunately, because of the complex nature of it, I usually just run through the flow chart. And this is such a large presentation. I would love to come back and present this to you, because it is a long, drawn out process with different slides. And I knew we only had an hour, and I didn't want to monopolize the time with the process, but I'd love to come back and I can get you guys the full presentation just so you can peruse it yourself.
We would love to have you back, so don't even worry about that. We do have questions for you.
Yeah, please.
So we're just going to stop. We're going to stop there. We have a question from Pastor Robinson. Then
Pastor
Judge,
Robinson, how you doing, sir?
Then Judge Williams. Pastor Robinson.
Major McCray is a good friend. Listen, I want to ask you a question.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good.
In the case of Mr. Floyd's murder, this guy had 18 different complaints in his file.
Yes.
I think a couple were shootings. I can't remember. But how many? He's clearly the common denominator. How many complaints has to go into a file before you consider terminating an officer or doing something with him to prevent him to continue to do what happened in Mr. Floyd's case?
That's a excellent question. One of the things that we do is our discipline is progressive. Every time an officer has an infraction, we look at their background when we determine what their discipline is going to be. I don't know if there's a magic number where we terminate them, but it depends on what offenses they have. If they have something, and I don't know what the officer in Mr. Floyd's murder, what his background was or what the infractions were, but if there are several red flags, we monitor that person's history. One of the things that we are doing, and one of the things when I get to the Citizen Complaint Oversight Panel that myself and Ms. Felix Lawson have talked about is, since I've been here and I've been in internal affairs for about a year now, we're looking at not just discipline. What we saw in the past is that officers would be disciplined for infractions early in their career, but we weren't necessarily doing things to change the behavior. So in an instance where an officer has an alcohol infraction, he was disciplined for that, maybe reduced in rank, given fines, things of that nature, or possibly terminated. But if that officer was maintained with the agency, we would send him for his mandatory 72 hours with psychological services, but we didn't make that discipline, requirement a part of their discipline. So now what we're doing is, for an instance like that, we're sending them to alcohol training. We're partnering with our union. We've partnered with our psychological service division, and we've partnered with the training and education division and putting on programs specific for infractions. Again, if it's a domestic violation, we're making sure they're getting family counseling and marriage counseling as a part of their discipline. If it's something like courtesy, we're ensuring that they are getting customer service training. Use of force, they're going back for remedial use of force training, de-escalation, you name it. We're trying to address those issues early on so these smaller infractions don't become larger infractions later on in the officer's career.
Now, you mentioned the Citizens Oversight Panel. If they recommend termination, do you normally follow that?
Yes, and again, we've been working with the group, and it's a very diverse panel. And I'm going to get into them in the presentation, but we take all of their recommendations. Since I've been here, it's a very diverse group. For those that don't know, the Citizen Complaint Oversight Panel is a group that's independent of the police department that is appointed by the county executive. They have a very diverse background, everything from PhDs to engineers, teachers, security guards, you name it. They have a very diverse representation of the community, and they live and work within Prince George's County. So we take their input and their recommendations seriously. When the Citizen Complaint Oversight Panel, they get every case that Internal Affairs investigates. They review it, they look at all the evidence, they have subpoena powers, and they'll make a recommendation to the chief. One of the things that I think is interesting that we've been doing with Ms. Felix Lawson is not just the recommendations to the chief, but we've been asking and receiving recommendations for our investigators in Internal Affairs and even with the supervisor. So if there's something, again, that the officer missed or something they think that the officer should do, or even recommendations from policy, we're implementing those. One quick example, and I can't get into case specifics, but we had a Facebook violation. We charged that officer with a sustained violation of the social media policy, but one of their recommendations was this falls into the realm of unbecoming conduct as well. And that's something we did in that instance, and we've done since then as well. So it's become a standard policy. And that's just one example.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
No problem.
I'm gonna ask our other members to keep our questions short. So we get to our next section, but I'm gonna ask Judge, do you wanna hop in here, Judge Alexander Williams?
Yes, Delegate, I know it's 6 o'clock and I'll just be
we're gonna be going all night, man.
Yeah, whatever we got to
do. Real short. There's a lot of talk in Annapolis about eliminating the police officers' Bill of Rights. And, I know you're coming back, and I know you can't say much today, but just wanted to know briefly what the implications were of that bill on your process. Just briefly, a couple of minutes, that's all.
Yeah, no problem, Judge. For those that don't know, the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights affords officers rights when they're going through the administrative process. There has been some litigation in Annapolis to either limit the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights or take it away. At this juncture, we haven't had any impact on our investigations. We're continuing to operate within the bounds of the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. One of the big things that LEOBR affords us is the actual opportunity to interview the officer. Without that Bill of Rights, the officer could elect to take his Fifth Amendment right and never give us a statement. So in the administrative process, we are able to get a statement from the officer. We usually reserve that portion until our partnership with the state's attorney's office is done. If it's a criminal offense, we don't want to interfere with the criminal investigation. There is a court proceeding that involved, it's called the Garrity Rule. It was a court proceeding in 1967 where an officer had to give an administrative statement. That statement was used against him criminally, and the Supreme Court ruled that it was a violation of his Fifth Amendment right. So we usually wait until the criminal proceeding is done, and then we do that administrative interview. But if we didn't have LEOBR, we would never even get that interview, which is often crucial, especially in our use of force instances, to get what the officer's perspective was, because it allows us to implement procedures and training and change our policy based on things that have happened in specific incidents. Major Alexander discussed it, and often will take incidents that have actually happened within Prince George's County and implement them in the training based on these administrative processes.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go to Delegate Fisher. I see you, Mr. Street. I see you, Councilman Streeter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to say, Mr. Chair, and to Judge, I think that this presentation or this section probably needs its own. I mean, I could ask 3 pages of questions about our administrative process. I think it needs its own thing. And I think this is the heart of what the county executive really wants us to dive into. I would say I'm going to try to be succinct. I think to me, there are two lanes I would love you to answer. One, do we have something that's systematic that goes into every officer on our force and consistently checks on the amount of complaints and issues they have? I'm on this work group and I'm on the one for the state. And something I told all the sheriffs, I was like, you better come to January and look at every single officer file you've got before I'm even talking to you in January. So one, I want to know, is there something systematic that our new chief or chiefs and whoever are looking at officers across the board all the time, not just when they have a complaint? And then my second question is, do you think that a recommendation to a chief and not actual power to implement a decision is self-regulating? And what other agency in our county is self-regulating itself in this manner? So I think I would like you to unpack the fact that it's a recommendation to a chief and it's not actual decision-making power. And do we have consistent, something systematic to look in officers' background? I have like 3 pages of questions, but I will either type them up for you or however, because, and I wanted you to answer these 2. And the last thing I'll say for the whole call, Mr. Chair, just bear with me, is whatever happens at the state level, which some of us on the call are working on, that is what it is. My expectation is that Prince George's County is above and beyond the minimum, which is the state, based on the nature of our county, who we represent and who is elected in this county. So we shouldn't be the minimum of whatever comes out of the state. We should be a department that's beyond that. And so that's my perspective. And I think I think a lot of people on this call share that. So if you could just speak on those 2, I am done talking. I'm so sorry, Mr. Chair, and that's it.
Yeah, Ms. Fisher, and I think I've done this presentation for you in Annapolis before. One of the things that we do have is, of course, we have that first line supervisor that's always reviewing performance of an officer. They also have performance reviews that they get every year that documents the officer's performance. And one of the things that I'm going to get into, and it does still deal with complaints and uses of force, is that we have a system that actually will flag an officer, and it's called the early warning system. And what happens is every month, if an officer has 2 complaints, 2 uses of force, or 1 use of force and 1 complaint within a 60-day period, we actually have it down to 30 days now. A mandatory counseling session is enacted with that officer. So that officer will sit down with their supervisor, their lieutenant, their captain, as well as their major, and they'll discuss any mitigating factors that's going on in the officers' lives, because we try to capture everything in reference to complaints and uses of force through internal affairs. But we found that this mechanism is something that can address any issues that the officer may be going through personally. Officers are human, just like everyone else. Factors like family issues, financial issues, stressors that may be impacting a performance are addressed in this session. Commanders ask and determine what may be going on in the officer's life that could be changing their performance or showing that why they may be having additional use of forces or complaints. Again, one of the things that we've been doing is creating these programs to address any of these issues. During that counseling session, they can give the officer leave, they can recommend them the psychological services, and they can also elect to use some of the training that we've created. So some of that courtesy training, that customer service training, alcohol-related training that we can put them through in counseling. Those are the things and ways that we're trying to capture it. So what we're doing is we're partnering with internal affairs, but we're also utilizing our supervisors to be there and be mentors. And one of the things that we did this year to ensure that that was happening is we had a mandatory supervisor training where they had different topics that they would go through. And one of them was internal affairs investigations. There was counseling and mentoring, report writing, anything the supervisor may experience. We put on this week-long class through the Training and Education Division to teach our supervisors that and remind them that they're mentors, that they are role models, and that they not only are looking into the officer's performance, but they're also taking care of their officers and making sure that their home life as well as their on-the-job lives are stable. And that training was in January, and I think to this point it's been effective. I think we've seen results, but we're only in the July with that. But those are the primary things that we're doing with this. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. Delegate Fisher, did your questions get answered?
Kind of, but my second one was on, whether it's the recommendations to the chief are the department regulating itself, because the panel doesn't actually have authority to make decisions. They can only recommend to the chief. And so I would like us to either unpack that or review how that can be changed so that the panel can actually have authority when it comes to, because internal investigation is really regulating yourself. Correct. And so I think we have to ask the question if that's effective.
Correct.
And I think Mr. Lotrich's question, which is in the chat, he put in the chat about how many of those have actually led in the last 10 years of people being removed and what's gone on, is data we really need. Because is that working is really the question. Self-regulating, is it working?
Yeah, correct. I think that is a big question. And as we think about internal affairs and the Inspector General's office, are these truly independent parts within the police department, which they should be, because they serve as the policing. They serve as policing the police. So your oversight is within the police department, and there's a perspective that that's not truly independent and effective. So I think that's Delegate Fisher's point. And so I wanted to make sure that if you can get that to us, get that question to us, that'd be great. Let's go on to the next question, please. We're gonna go to Crystal Ariata, then Mr. Ross, and then final question, Mr. Rodney Streeter.
Thank you. And following the same line, but another layer, thank you for letting us know about this early warning system.
Yes.
But I'm just curious how that escalates to the next level. So let's say someone gets flagged and then they get flagged again, they get flagged again? Is it just this constant loop of we'll sit you down and we'll have a conversation? Is there any amount of number of complaints without even if they were found to be valid through the process or not that trigger anything other than a conversation?
Again, it depends on the circumstances of the case and whether it's sustained. If the case is sustained and it's based on complaints or it's a use of force and it's sustained, that discipline is going to be progressive as well. So if you're getting flagged a number of times, we're taking that into consideration, and the discipline will be progressive for each of those incidents. And one of the conversations that we've been having with the chief and with our inspector general is that when we have these incidents where we have multiple infractions, especially even if it's something as minor as courtesy, we're taking into consideration whether that officer should remain with our police department. Courtesy is a relatively minor infraction on the scale of discipline, but that first contact that an officer has with an individual can dictate how the conversation goes or how that incident goes, and whether it escalates to something more serious. I think that courtesy is the first or the foundation of interaction with the public. If officers aren't courteous, we're not going to get the respect that we are trying to obtain through the conversation. So things like that. So we are taking these multiple flags into consideration, and not even with the serious discipline. The serious discipline, it's easy to remove those officers, but even with some of the minor infractions, it's things that we're considering when looking at an officer's history.
Right, but if they were, let's say, like just throwing out a number, if an officer got like 100 complaints that were never sustained, then there would be nothing would happen there. It's only weighted on if they're found sustained, correct?
Yes, but again, we have to take into the factors, and we try to give our officers the right to, if a complaint can be made, but if we look into the complaint and you said it's 100 complaints, if all of them are unfounded, let's say, and it's all on video and it refutes the facts that were made in the complaint, we're not going to hold that officer accountable because he has several complaints if there's evidence that shows that it's unfounded. Now, if it's something like it's non-sustained and we're getting like red flags and it's like, well, it's a he said, she said, but it's always the officer's word against this person. Those are things where we'll meet, we'll sit down with the Office of Law, we'll sit down with our Inspector General, and we'll sit down with the chief, and we'll discuss this officer's history. Again, it's going to be a case-by-case basis, but if you have 100 flags and 70 of them are non-sustained and some are sustained and the rest are unfounded, we're taking all of that into consideration, if that makes sense.
And can we get the data on how many claims have been reported in general, and then like the breakdown of outcome? And
yes,
also the breakdown on the type of, I guess, infraction, and then the type of discipline. Do you guys track that as well?
Yeah, yep. We'll have all that, and I'll get it to you. And I'm sure it'll be an ongoing conversation. And there's several infractions, but we'll get you the primary ones. And if you have questions about additional ones, we'll make sure we get those to you as well.
Okay. No.
She tried to sneak one in.
Good. Thank you. I'll text you.
All right, we're gonna go to Mr. Ross. Mr. Ross, please, one question, and then we're gonna go to
I'll make mine real short.
And Major, if you could be straightforward with your answer.
I'll do my best.
I'm sitting here looking at the April 2019 to September 2020 Prince George's County Citizens Review report.
Yes.
And I see most of the complaints here that was filed, you both agreed. And I'm looking at that number, I'm going like, wow, they can't agree on so many. It's such a large number. And then when I read what proposed, I look at the citizens panel review and how that works. I think we need to spend a section on that to look at. And I look at the amount of money that's being spent, proposed for this year, $321,000 and $800. And we have 2 employees, a total of about 7 employees. And what exactly are they doing for those funds? And I know you can answer that. So Alonzo, so I need to bring that.
I know Miss Felix Lawson is on the call, and she might have a little bit more insight into that. But I want to say that, again, we're proud of that data. When we have an outside independent look at the cases, I think that speaks to the level of impartiality and thoroughness that we have with these cases. Personnel law kind of limits it, but I would love for you guys to actually see a case and see the detail and see all the evidence and effort that's put into these cases. And that's something that the Citizen Complaint Oversight Panel has a chance to see.
Yeah, that's true. But also the citizens should be able to file directly with the oversight panel. I believe there's a provision for that. I would rather see all complaints go through the citizen review panel. And I guess for Ms. Lawson, the question would be, are you notified of a fatal shooting in 24 hours?
Is your question, is the panel notified of a shooting within 24 hours? So,
yes.
No. We get the file once Internal Affairs has conducted its review and issued its recommended disposition. So no.
Okay, thank you. I'm done.
Next question, we have Mr. Streeter.
So, Mr. Washington, actually, Mr. Ross, that was the line of question that I wanted to pursue, so I'm good.
We're so good. I love it. I think we have one more question, Miss Judy Danso.
Yes, Delegate. Thank you so much. I figured that I could take his place.
Judy, how are you?
I'm good, Major McCray. How are you?
Good.
So I just had a quick proposal, actually, more of a request, because I'm certain that with all that is occurring around police reform, our department has already sort of begun to think about how we can enhance our efforts around transparency. I mean, that's why we have this task force and why we're having this departmental presentation. So I certainly understand, some of the challenges and limitations with respect to transparency around LEOBR, MPIA, and all of that. But what I'd like to know is whether the department would be willing to provide the task force a proposal of some sort that will lend itself to, the ultimate recommendations that we're charged with providing to the county executive in October. I mean, because I think that we can certainly all agree that there are ways that we could probably be more transparent with respect to some of these police involved incidents. And I know we have CCOP, but I would really like to know whether or not the department will be in a position to do that, because as Delegate Fisher said, IA is a huge part of this. And we certainly can go all night, but even if it's, recommendations legislatively, internal structural changes, creation of any sort of aggregate investigatory entity, whatever, a development of an MOU, anything that you all could propose to the task force, I think that would really be helpful for us to kind of discuss and then ultimately make some recommendations around.
Great. That's great.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Major.
Yeah, I was going to say, yes, Judith, that's something. And again, I don't want to speak for the chief. We've got all the important people on the call that can do that influence, but the department welcomes transparency. It's one of the things that we wanted to work to do. It's one of the things that I've discussed with Ms. Felix Lawson is allowing people to see the effort that these investigators are putting in. When I came here a year ago, one of the goals that myself and Commander David Robinson and Commander Travell Watson saw when we come in, we each have backgrounds in criminal investigation. And we wanted that level of investigation for our internal affairs investigation. So we brought in people that we knew could do the job, and we had the backing of the chief and the deputies to bring those people in and do it. So I would be proud to share these investigations with the panel. I welcome any recommendations because we can't do it by ourselves. It's a community effort, and that's what this panel is for. But I'm open to those conversations, and I'm sure they'll be ongoing.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for the presentation. The judge and I have agreed that we've made it to a good point and asking a lot of questions. And so, Chief, we're gonna cut the presentation. I know you got 3 more sections to go, including a few sections on crime data, body cameras, and DOJ. And so we wanted to find some time to go over that a little later. It seems like we're getting a little late. And so we wanted to use this opportunity for the rest of the members to be able to ask questions of you, Chief Velez, just because you're still here and you're here in front of us. And so, or anyone else or any other questions that you had from the previous slides. We're going to do this until about 6:30. And so I do have a couple quick questions for you, Major, before you leave. And that's if how many officers, based on your process, have been fired based on your recommendations over the last 3 years? And can you give us that information, and is that information made public?
I can definitely give you that information. We have it. Again, I've been in internal affairs for about a year. I don't have those numbers handy right now, but yeah, I'll definitely get those to the board and we'll discuss them. One of the processes, and I won't be too long here, but one of the things that happens when it's termination or reduction in rank is we have an executive command vote. And what happens is I will take the entire case file, all the evidence, we'll go through the witness statements, we'll look at video, and I'll present it to the chief, the assistant chief, the 4 deputies, and the chief of staff. We'll also have our inspector general in there for any legal or personnel law advice. They'll vote on the recommendation and then they'll elect to terminate the officer or not. But we have those records. And we'll even throw in reduction in rank just so you have it as well.
That's true, exactly. So I think we're looking for data here of the effectiveness of internal affairs and
Definitely.
how and what has occurred from it. And my question is also, how often are these complaints, a citizen makes a complaint against an officer, how often do they receive the update on what happened, the results of your investigation?
And that's an excellent question too, because one of the things that I saw here, and I talked with then Chief Stawinski and Chief Velez was the assistant chief at the time, and we were sending out letters to individuals, but we found that a lot of times those letters would come back returned to sender, or they would take too long to get to the person. So what we're doing is we're ensuring that our investigators are in touch with the complainant throughout the process. So they're giving them information via phone call, and then we're following up with email or through the official letter. So we're making sure that we're out in contact with that person. Unfortunately, especially with LEOBR, these cases can be long, especially the criminal portion. The administrative portion doesn't even begin until the criminal portion is done. And sometimes it can be a year, but we're making sure we make notifications at the end of the investigation's completion.
Now that sounds like a long process. So let me.
Yes, it is. Trust me.
And then let me just go to the chief real quick, because I do have a more philosophical question for the chief, and an important one. And please don't take this offensively, but for me, it was said earlier that by one of the presenters that the police department is a paramilitary organization. Should that be the case if we're talking about public safety and keeping people safe here? In your opening comments, there weren't any statements about the purpose of the police department, why we should have a police department, what the police department does, and how does it help people? Because the police department honestly does help people. And they are there for people, but we need to understand, is paramilitary the purpose of a police department, or should it be public safety? And that concerns me. And so I want to know your opinion on that, and whether it should be pure public safety. We can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So when we refer to the agency being paramilitary, what we're talking about is uniform, rank structure. Can you turn your, thank you. Uniform, rank structure, officers receiving direction, from superiors. Those are the types of things that we're talking about. If an officer gives, or let's say a sergeant gives a subordinate a command that's expected to be followed, that's what we're talking about when we talk about paramilitary. When it comes to the police department and the community, absolutely not. I can tell you that I was a panel member in Mexico years ago. The Mexican police were overhauling their internal affairs process, and they had this entire video that they showed in the beginning. And I sat there just wondering if they saw the issues with it. I mean, they had the helicopters, they had officers jumping off the helicopters with machine guns. That is paramilitary. We, as far as we're concerned, we are about reaching out to the community, building relations with the community, building trust, working together on community issues. That is our focus. Our focus is going out and making sure that the community knows who their officers are. And some of the things I talked about was making sure that the community knows who the leadership of this agency is. I'm the interim chief, but I want my deputy chiefs out there engaged in these conversations. I want my majors, my captains, I want them involved in these community discussions, because it can't be at our level only. One of the things I had discussed is, you know, when we have events, community events, typically your cops officers come out, and the cops officers have a good relationship with those, you know, that particular community. And what I would like to see is, if we are going to have a community event in a particular community, to have the cops officers take over the responsibilities of the officers that are running calls for service, and bring those officers who rarely get interaction with the community other than running calls for service, get them out of running calls and interacting with the community. I'm of the thought that every police officer should be a community-oriented police officer. We have squads that specialize in that, and that's fine. But the mentality of every police officer on this agency has to be that I am a community-oriented police officer. And my responsibility is to see how I can go about working with the community members or other stakeholders in addressing long-term problems in the community. My personal
Go ahead, Chief. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
My personal philosophy or thought on this is that for decades, police departments have been used inappropriately. You know, you think for years, you know, and this was, I would say, before 2010, my experience was 5 o'clock, county government shut down. And it was kind of like handing the keys to the police officers and saying, you're going to address every issue, every societal issue, whether you have the training or not, but it's your responsibility until we come back at 9 o'clock in the morning. And the analogy I use is duct tape. We all have duct tape. I think we all have duct tape in the toolbox, but you know, if your antenna breaks off, duct tape it together until you can fix it. If you got a leak under the sink, duct tape it until you can fix it. And I think that's the reason why we have seen so much progress over the last 10 years in crime reduction, is because community, the county government became involved, community became involved, and it became a holistic approach to addressing societal issues. And I think that's where we need to be. This task force, in my view, I think it's great. I welcome it because it can only make us get better. There are so many things so many perspectives that you all bring to the table. I teach for the University of Maryland Global Campus online and hybrid classes. And I tell my students, everyone has to speak up because everyone brings different perspectives to the conversation. I, as the interim chief or the assistant chief, learn so much from my students every class. And I think that's important for us to understand, is that, yes, we are the police, but we're not the know-all be-all.
Right.
And
Chief, I appreciate that, and thank you for the comments. I'm gonna go to the questions real quick. I know Ms. Yamet, Ms. Gutierrez had a question. Did you want to say that yourself, Ms. Gutierrez? I'll go ahead and ask the question. Can you, I know you're about to go, I think she's about to hop on now. Is that right? Okay, I'll ask her a question. I think next time we come up, can you give us some information on data stop, on traffic stops? Just the opportunity. I think you probably were going to include some of that in the data that we asked for. But if you can make sure we have that next time we have you presented in front of us, that'd be great to have. I did have a couple other questions from Mr. Dwayne Preston about the number of complaints filed against SROs. Can you speak to that? Mr. Dwayne, you want to ask that question yourself? Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Delegate Washington. And good evening, Chief Velez and all the other members of command staff. Just a quick question. I know a lot came up in the public information session about removing SROs from the school system. And some things specifically were raised about the number of incidents involving police officers and students. Can you all speak to how many complaints or how many use of force incidents have occurred in the county schools? How many complaints have been filed? And speak a little bit about that issue, if you would, please.
Well, I don't have those numbers with me. I didn't come prepared to discuss that, but I can tell you that one thing we do is we focus a lot of attention on our school resource officers. They have to go through a 40-hour curriculum training, specialized training, and we're very active, engaged with the school principals and things like that to see if we can determine if there are any issues. I'm aware of, off the top of my head, about 3 that I can recall. I'm sure there are more, but I can certainly get those answers to you.
And just to follow up, Chief, based on your experience, what is your opinion about the SROs as it relates to the relationship with the administration and the students in the school system?
So I think with regards to the SROs, we shouldn't look at it as an and or an o or an or process. I think it's important to understand that the SROs that are in these schools because they have a passion for what they do. And these SROs are mentors to a lot of students. To a lot of students, the interaction with an SRO is the first interaction they're going to have with a police officer. And I think, the guidance that these SROs provide to the students, the interactions that they have, it's invaluable. For a time there, the Prince George's County Police Department was not involved in the schools. You had the sheriff's officers that were involved. And what we noticed was that we had lost this ability to make connections, to build relationships with the youth in various communities. And that's something that we noticed. And so that's why I believe it was Chief McGaw had made such a push to try to get us back in to the schools, because at the end of the day, the sheriff's deputies were not the ones running calls for service in the evening and coming into contact with some of these students. Our officers were. So that's a very, very important part to this. There are, students that have, issues at home that have confided in our officers. I was reading a report the other day about a particular SRO who will reach out to parents, or parents will reach out to him and say, I can't make it there to pick up my kid. Would you mind bringing him home? And he will bring him home. So I think, and I'll give one other example. When I was a district commander at District 1, we had decided we were going to place an SRO in all of the high schools and have a roving SRO through the middle schools. And I was short 2 officers. At first, I opened it up for people to volunteer, but I was short 2 officers. I had 2 positions, and I called these 2 officers that I had taken notice of in the district, and I called them into the office and I said, I need you to do me this favor. But if it's something you're absolutely against, I understand. And they both said, sir, we'll do it. And 9 years later, I had a conversation with them at a gas pump. This was 2 years ago, and had remarked how they said, we'll do it for you, but yet they stayed for 9 years. And it's because they didn't realize how much they would love that position, how much they would love interacting with the students. I'm sorry.
Chief, because we're trying to close out here, and I apologize for cutting you off. We're gonna have you back, I promise.
Okay.
But I think that the question was asked earlier of one of the DCAOs about training that the police officers go through for young people between the ages of 0 and 5, or even teenagers too. And so I think that's something to think about. And also, if we can get information on, we know they go through 40 hours of training that was required by state law, which I sponsored in the state. And so we wanted to make sure, does the county go above and beyond that as well in training for SROs too? So if you can just keep that in the back of your mind. So next time when we do bring up SROs, today is not the day, but when we do have that conversation, that'd be great. I'm gonna go to Ms. Krista Oriata for the next question. And I think Ms. Josephine, did you have a follow-up as well? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So to that question or conversation that we were just having about SROs, this isn't my initial question, but I would like to have data on, I believe there was somewhere around 350 arrests in 2017 to 2018 in Prince George's County by SROs, and just a breakdown of understanding like what those arrests were for, and understanding, because the school to prison pipeline is a huge issue. I personally do not support officers in schools because of those reasons, but I think having an understanding, were these nonviolent, were these just kids being kids, because the data shows that people are 5 times more likely, or officers are 5 times more likely to arrest students for disorderly conduct when there's an officer at school. So I know you don't have that information now, but that's one of the data points I'd like you to bring. But my question, there's a trend right now with some, probably what you would consider more, I guess, progressive chiefs of police saying that a lot of their hands are tied when it comes to getting rid of bad officers because of collective bargaining agreements or something similar to what we have, because not every state has an officer bill of rights. This is not something that every police department is afforded, as being a barrier for getting rid of bad officers. And I just wanted your take on that in this new position, seeing those two entities as a barrier for getting rid of bad officers.
So I don't think the LEOBR is a barrier to getting rid of bad officers. Investigations, internal investigations, can be very successful. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Internal investigations can be very successful. The LEOBR, what that does for us, well, let me break it down, because James had mentioned it. So you have two possibilities, and that is an officer is engaged in criminal misconduct, and an officer, separate officer, is engaged in an administrative violation of policy. If an officer is engaged in criminal misconduct, that case is handled as a criminal case. LEOBR does not apply. So the criminal investigation is done. It is then sent to the state's attorney's office, and the state's attorney decides whether or not they're going to proceed. And then once that criminal process is done, then it comes over to the administrative process. So let's go to the administrative process. When an officer is accused of engaging in misconduct, I know there's people that think there shouldn't be a 5-day window to make a statement, but the officer is required to have an attorney present. And so the 5 days, and it's my understanding, because I wasn't around when LEOBR was established, but it's my understanding that the time frame was established to allow that officer to secure legal counsel, and for that legal counsel and that officer to arrange a date and time with the investigator to sit down and provide a statement. So it's now 5 days. I can tell you that we are hard pressed when we get an officer in. Even if we were to try to get, even if the officer said, I'd like to give you a statement now, but I need my attorney, The attorneys that represent these officers typically specialize in LEOBR issues, and they typically work for an FOP or several FOPs, and they're typically responding to various jurisdictions to represent officers. So that causes an issue in terms of us being able to get an interview right then and there. But other than that, as long as the investigation is conducted thoroughly, fairly, and impartially, and within the time frame, then there shouldn't be any reason why that officer, if he is found to be guilty of those allegations, to be disciplined accordingly.
And who decides that's criminal? You mentioned that if it's criminal, it moves into this lane versus who makes that distinction? I apologize.
No, that's fine. So if there's a criminal allegation, let's say, when I was in internal affairs, I had somebody call and say that an officer stole a couple of credit cards from her deceased ex-husband's home and used those cards to purchase items. That's clearly a criminal accusation.
Use of force, for example, like that might not be, like that doesn't automatically go to criminal. It goes to administration, correct?
Well, we look at the circumstances, and if there is enough reason to believe that this officer was engaging in lawful conduct during the course of his business or being a police officer, we can proceed down an administrative path. But if we realize that that's not the case, we can always revert to criminal. It doesn't mean that you're stuck in one path, if that makes sense.
Thank you for that, Chief. We're going to have to go on to the next question. I know that the Internal Affairs is going to be back in front of us to give us a deeper dive into that process too. So thank you for that. Our last question, and then we're going to have a closing remarks and have our own meeting too. So thank you, Chief. Ms. Josephine Morning. Ms. Morning.
Yes, thank you, Chief. I have a question that a lot of our citizens are really concerned about. It seems that we have a lot of military equipment here in Prince George's County with the Prince George's County Police Force. And it's leading our citizens to think that we are at war with each other here. Can you tell me, first of all, I'd like to know how much military equipment we have. And also, if we do have this extraordinary amount of military equipment, can you explain to us why?
Sure. So when you're talking about military equipment, with our officers, we have what's called a patrol rifle program. In the past, officers used to carry shotguns, or some officers, if the officer was qualified to carry it. Because of several incidents throughout the United States, where we have perpetrators that are using high-powered rifles, the shotguns, and especially in an area like this, the use of a shotgun is not something that is an appropriate tool. But so what we did was we ended up going to a patrol rifle program, but those rifles remain secured in the vehicle, and they're only used if the officer is engaged with someone that has high profile or high-powered firearms. We have Bearcats, and those are the big vehicles that semi-armored. Those are used when we respond to barricade situations. They're used when we respond to hostage situations. And those are used to not only protect the officers, but we've used them in the past to approach locations and extract victims. So they're not an attack tool. They don't have weapons attached to them. They are simply there to protect officers. If the officers have to make an approach to the building, the options are they approach on foot and risk being shot, or they approach in the vehicle, they exit the vehicle, and then to take whatever tactical steps they need to take. It's my understanding, and we did an inventory. The only military rifles that we have received from the military are the M1s, and they're inert, and that's for our color guard. So they're not functioning rifles.
But don't we have tanks also?
No. And you know what? Actually, I think this would be a good idea. If you all agree, we can arrange for all of you to come out to our SOD, and our Special Operations Division can show you what we have and how we use it, why we use it. That's if you decide to go down that route.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Can you supply us with a list of the inventory of military equipment that we have?
Absolutely.
We very much appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, as long as it's social distant and safe, Chief.
Yes.
But it's around these times, man.
I know.
Doing all that.
We will do it in small groups outside.
Okay, I just want to thank everybody on behalf of myself and Judge Lamazzi. Judge, did you want to say anything?
I just wanted to say I appreciated it very much. A lot of work went into this, and I thought it was very comprehensive. And I'd like to go on the field trip.
Great.
I think we all can get out the house. I also want to thank you, Chief, for coming here and congratulate you on your interim position. And we look forward to having a longer conversation over the next couple of months to really make sure that we have some recommendations and reforms. And obviously, we'll take any recommendations from you as well that you believe that we should have. And so we would love to have that dialogue with you. And if there was something on here that if you can give, we'll go through those things later, and we'll have another email and we'll have another follow-up. Lieutenant Charmaine has been doing a great job with us connecting to the police department. So we'll follow up with you on our next presentation. Any closing remarks from you, Chief, in 30 seconds or less?
30 seconds or less. Again, I just want to reiterate how important your work is to us, and how much we value your input, how much we look forward to your recommendations, and how much we look forward to working with you to implement those recommendations. Policing has to be ever evolving. We can't sit on our laurels and say, what we looked at our policies 4 years ago and they're good. We have to constantly looking at what we're doing and to see if they are meeting the community's demand, because demands of the community change, and we need to be able to change with the community. We need to be able to remain flexible. And that's where my mindset is. It's about being transparent, and it's about being in the forefront of leadership in policing.
Thank you for that. And thank you to everyone involved. Great presentations. And so we look forward to having you next time. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to the next portion of our agenda, which is some, I think, housekeeping items that we wanted to discuss with everybody. Miss Lieutenant Harvin, I believe you wanted to talk about communications, connecting with everyone.
Yes, Delegate. Do we want to wait for everyone else to log off and then we'll go into our internal meeting?
No, they can stay. We're public, so we're going to keep the conversation public. So.
Okay. So for lines of communication for the general public, we have our new police reform email address, and we also have the webpage, which is active as of yesterday. So if you go to the county government webpage, there is a tab listed there for the police reform work group. The public can send correspondence to the email address, and they can find all updated meetings and information located on the new webpage.
Great.
Miss Lieutenant Harvin, can you make sure that there's, and Ryan, I think Ryan's still on, but I think a couple of things we asked for is making sure folks are able to register or subscribe to our email list when we have meetings to notify people of our meetings, and a place, and just, I guess, for everyone that come in contact with residents or constituents or anything like that, and they want to make comments to us, they can always email us their comments through police reform work group at code.pg.md.us. And so they can always send that to us too. I think those are the other things that we had on there. I think, and also on that webpage, it will be a list of documents that we will have out there too, that we can have publicly.
Those documents will soon be uploaded, and the email address is policereformtaskforce@co.pg.md.us. Again, that's policereformtaskforce@co.pg.md.us.
Really? I thought it was changed. I thought it was work group. Did we change it back to task force?
The email address had to stay the same for sake of public, that we'd already made it public. So.
Oh, okay, that's confusing.
We'll take it.
All right, that's confusing. Okay. Any other communications things we need to talk about? And we ask any questions you have too. Sir, Mr. Archie, you had a question?
Well, it's two things I want to address that was brought up. One was brought up by Ms. Fisher about policy and training. It's usually incidents that drives policy.
Well, Mr. Archie, let's hold on 1 second, okay? Before we go to, can we stick to communications real quick, and then we'll go to just overall topics that people want to discuss. And let's be mindful, we started this meeting at 4 o'clock. It's almost 7 o'clock too. So any other communications things that we want to talk about, Ms. Charmaine?
When is the next meeting?
You're muted. You're muted.
When is the next meeting?
Hold on. Go ahead.
The next meeting has not been announced. We will regroup, and then we'll publicize the next meeting on the webpage, and we'll send out social media through the county executives page and the county government webpage for the next available meeting date.
So let me jump in here real quick on that. So we've met the last 3 weeks. And so the judge and I wanted to take a week to start to do more planning based on the feedback that we've received from every member to be able to plan the presentations that you all want to see and to be able to divide up the work groups too. There's gonna be 5 work groups. We have not announced what those work groups are, and we have not decided who the chair is yet. And so the co-chair and I will meet next week to discuss all those and finalize these. And then the following week we'll meet, and I think we'll meet at this time the following week, possibly. So we think that this is probably the best time for most folks to meet, 4 p.m. on Thursday. No, it's not good for everybody. We unfortunately we had to find a time that it seems like everybody's been meeting this time for the last couple of weeks. So I think we have to keep it unless we send. I think changing it around will send our community wouldn't have a date certain. They know when we meet. I think that's the most important thing we can do. And I think I covered all of that. Correct, Lieutenant Huffman?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you have, Delegate.
Okay. Any questions on that, on the next week or us deciding on things? If you can still if you have not sent in your recommendations or your items that you want to see us have people in front of us do presentations, what your interests are, if you have not sent that in yet, or your bio, please send that in as soon as possible so we can get all of that together and be able to plan out the next 3 months for us. Okay.
Communication.
I see Crystal and then Ms. Gutierrez.
So for the emails, will you guys just be putting that into that section you created for us for Teams so that we can see all of the things that people are sending in, or what would that process look like?
So the emails will come into the general police reform task force mailbox. Myself and the other team members will filter those questions back to the group so that you all can hear the questions that the public is asking, and then we can provide a response to them in the open meeting form or reply back to them through the email address that they provide.
I would much rather, Lieutenant Harvin, if you can just take those. We want to see what they exactly said. So there shouldn't be any review or anything like that. It should be just directly sent to us or placed on that Microsoft server that you told us about. And it's our responsibility to go in there and check for that. So you don't have to filter that to us. I think we should go in and take a look at that.
And there are currently some comments uploaded to the Microsoft team. So at your discretion, you all can go and view what's already currently there. So that's where I've been uploading the public's comments for you guys to take a look at and or respond.
Okay, Ms. Gutierrez. You're muted.
You're unmuted, Ms. Gutierrez. Maybe your volume.
Are you talking? Can you talk? Nope, we can't hear you. Want to chat your comment? Take your comment in the chat. I'm gonna go to who else has a question? Anyone? Before we go to Mr. Ard, anyone else? Okay, Mr. Archie, you had a comment about today, and I guess we can go into how folks felt today was, what more you want to see. We already got some comments at what you want to see moving forward, but this is open discussion right now, and this is public conversation. So because so this is all public. This is being streamed live still.
Okay. First, let me just introduce myself. I'm Archie O'Neill, and I'm the director for public safety for safety and security service for the school system. And one of the things that was brought out today, and I just want to clear it because I wanted to clear with the police department on the air, and that was asked about the number of arrests. I think Miss what was her name? Yes, asked about it. Those 350 arrests occurred through the school system and not through the SROs. But because of the reporting process based on the state, they put it in. It had to be put in as SROs, but the SROs didn't make those arrests. I just want to make sure that's clear. It was the school system, my officers, who made those arrests. I'll make sure that's clear. And the other thing I wanted to bring to your attention, it was about policy. You know, usually it's incidents that drive policies. If you have a fatal shooting of a citizen handcuffed, it's because of an incident that drives policy. You know, and so I just want to make sure people understand that it's not just you set a policy, it's usually because of an incident that drives a written policy on how to avoid it in the future. I just want to clear those things up for you.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts? On communications, Ms. Gutierrez says, on communications, can something be created that we can share on social media with the working group information and ahead of time of our meetings? In that vein, well, that's one, Ryan, I think that's for you. In that vein, can we have council members send meeting information to their constituents? I want to make sure we're getting the work group's information out. I totally agree with all of those. Ryan, can you hit on the first point? And then I'm gonna ask Ms. Harbin to come into the last points about just outreach, because I know that this is our county executives work group. And so she has a very large list too. And so that can also be used outside of the council members. Ryan, you wanna hop in here?
Sure, this is Ryan Middleton here. Regarding our communications, our website is live now. We were just able to get it live as of yesterday. So from now on, we'll be handing you assets to use in your social media, to use for your lists and professional networks to broadcast any further meetings. So moving forward, the webpage will be the home base for everything public facing for the work group. And so for instance, right now, this meeting is being broadcast live on the webpage.
Ryan, I think the question was more so, can we get the social media links or social media, what is it called? GIFs or GIFs or pictures out ahead of time, JPEGs out ahead of time, so that we can share it on our social media and the members can get the word out themselves. And I also believe that we should, on that email list of people signed up to speak last week, we should send out notifications to them as well. And I think the question is also, can the county executive send out an email about these work group meetings too, so that residents know more about what's happening?
Yep, the answer to everything, all those questions is yes.
All right, okay, anything else?
Just really quickly, Delegate, this is Judy Danso. I just wanted to vocalize IG Turner's point in the group chat regarding the chief's last response. I just think it's important to add to that. He's absolutely right with respect to the determination whether an officer's conduct is criminal, which is made in consultation with our office, the State's Attorney's Office, and we certainly can, accept those recommendations as proposed or enhance the charges. But we certainly do work closely with the Internal Affairs Division in regards to whether or not, matters certainly rise to the level of criminal conduct. So I just think that that's important, since we are still public, that, that everyone is made aware of that comment that he posted in the chat.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Turner, for the information. Any other questions? Any other comments? So you'll hear from us next week, preferably before Thursday, about what the next steps are and who the next presenters are. And what work groups you'll be on, and we'll set the agenda moving forward. Judge Lamazny, do you have any final comments?
Thank you to everybody. This was a great meeting.
Next time, I won't be allowing so many questions. So, no, I'm joking. That was great. Everybody did a great job. These were really good questions. So
They were great questions.
Yeah, I think everybody did a really good job today. So thank you for your questions. Great work. Okay, see you guys. Have a good day.
Take care.
Good day.
Good weekend.
Good night.
Good night.